Imagine you're 5 months pregnant, you're 2 months away from marrying the love of your life. You've just got a new home, you're working at your dream job, and you're driving home from work when everything you know and love is taken away from you, and your life is cut short, revealing deep, dark secrets. Now let's get into the case for today. Today, I get to tell you about the most kind-hearted, gentle, hard-working woman that I've had the pleasure to learn about, Avis Marie Banks. She was born on August 18, 1979, to Frederick and Deborah Banks. Fred and Deborah grew up in western Mississippi. They bought a home together in Vicksburg, which is a smaller city along the east bank of the Mississippi River, with a population of about 25,000 people. Vicksburg was a great place for Fred and Deborah to start a family. It was close to their relatives, it had a cute historic vibe, a great school district, and a supportive church community, and it's only about an hour's drive away from Jackson, the state capital. Living in Vicksburg, Mississippi is a unique experience. It's full of Southern charm, history, and culture. The streets are lined with towering oak trees and antebellum mansions. Vicksburg is a place where the past and the present collide, and where residents take pride in their heritage. On any given day, you can find Vicksburg residents enjoying a stroll through the Vicksburg National Military Park, visiting the Old Courthouse Museum, or catching a show at the Vicksburg Theater Guild. Living in Vicksburg is also about savoring the simple things in life. It's about sitting on your porch swing on a warm summer night, listening to the crickets chirp and the river roll by. It's about enjoying a delicious home-cooked meal with family and friends, and it's about taking the time to appreciate the beauty of the world around you. The Banks had a cute little coin home with a porch out front, perfect for a rocking chair to sit on during those southern afternoons and evenings. Deborah and Fred both came from families who valued hard work and supported each other unconditionally. Fred was working as a street sweeper, helping the city of Vicksburg stay clean and safe to live in. Deborah was a full-time mom, and she was also the go-to babysitter for all their neighbors and relatives. They both worked very hard to provide for their family. Fred would provide for all their needs, and the money that Deborah brought in would be saved for special vacations or activities. They welcomed their first daughter, Latada Banks, in September of 1975. Then, when Deborah got pregnant with Avis about 4 years later, Latada was so excited to have a sister. Avis was born in 1979, and she was a quiet, happy baby, just a cutie pie. Later, in August 1985, Avis and Latada welcomed another sister, Frena Banks, and then the sisterhood was complete. This is a gorgeous family, and growing up, the Banks sisters did everything together. They shared clothes, brought boys over, laughed together, sometimes fought, but they had fun. Avis and Frena were particularly close. They were best friends. They would talk about their future, how they both wanted kids around the same age who would one day play together, and Avis was very protective of her younger sister. Avis's mother said she loved all her children, but Avis was different. She was a perfect child, and there was something about her, something that was different from the beginning. And I was wondering, do you think that parents have favorites? I've always heard that they do, but I only have one child, so I don't know if that's possible. But I've heard it is, so let me know in the comments what you think. Avis valued education, and there was a time when she brought home her report card that was all A's and 1 B, and she was crying. Frena was concerned because she got B's and wondered if that was bad, but Avis just had high standards for herself. When she and Frena would play school, Avis was always the teacher, and she would love to read to her little sister and teach her everything and anything she could. She also put others before herself all the time, especially her little sister. She would let her win at games they'd play because she wanted to boost her confidence, and she always made sure Frena was taken care of. The same went for Avis's friends. If they were ever in need, she would be the first to step up and offer something of her own to help them out, even if it was to her detriment. Every Sunday, the family attended Locust Grove Missionary Baptist Church, where the sisters learned to put their faith first. Fred raised his daughters to be smart and conscientious. When Latada went to high school and started hanging out with boys, Fred totally went into protective dad mode. He made sure all the boys had only the best intentions for his daughters. They knew how he expected a man to treat them, and Fred would be there to make sure they were treated well. As Avis got older, she had a really close relationship with her dad. Fred called her his little hero. By the time she attended Warren Central High School, Avis was a huge bookworm and dedicated to her studies. While other kids in high school were starting to experiment with alcohol and other substances, Avis loved nothing more than staying home and hanging out with her mom, dad, and sisters while she read a book. She always had a book with her. If the family was watching TV, Avis still had a book out, reading while taking a peek at the TV every now and then. It's like she always wanted to feel productive. She also loved spending time with her extended family and taking care of younger kids, especially babies. When Avis graduated from high school in 1997, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life: work with kids and have kids of her own one day. It was around the same time that her older sister, Latata, moved out of the family home. This gave Avis and Frina a chance to become even closer, but they still spent time with Latata. As a matter of fact, she would come get her younger sisters, and they'd spend the weekends at her place, going shopping, out to eat, and having fun girl time. That summer, in June, Fred and Deborah saved enough money to take Frina and Avis on a trip to Disney World. They drove 730 miles, and while Deborah started the trip driving, Fred was right there in the passenger seat documenting everything on his camcorder. Avis was shy. She didn't like being the center of attention or being on camera, so as Fred turned to face the girls in the back seat, 17-year-old Avis covered herself up. Meanwhile, 12-year-old Frina was just asleep without a care in the world as they made that 11-hour drive. And when they got to the park, Fred again whipped out the camcorder and recorded the girls as they rode roller coasters, screaming and laughing, and having the time of their lives together. Avis preferred to take any photos they had and make scrapbooks for everyone. She wanted to be able to look back on all of these special moments. She would spend hours creatively putting them together, and you could tell how much the Banks family loved one another. Fred cared so deeply about his wife and his girls. He had tears in his eyes when his eldest got married. He walked Latata down the aisle, and as she began to cry, he patted her gently, showing that he was there by her side. Avis and Frina looked beautiful. They were just cherishing this special moment with their sister and family. Their hair was done perfectly. Their makeup was on point. Everything was perfect. So, it's hard to imagine that tragedy would strike before Fred's second daughter would ever walk down the aisle. Frina said this was her favorite picture of her and Avis together at Latata's wedding. They were so happy. But she recalls that neither of them had any plans of their own to get into a serious relationship, at least not yet. Avis really wanted to get her education first. She wore a beautiful gold dress since she was the maid of honor, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. When they say that someone could light up a room, I'm aware that it's very cliché. We hear it in so many true crime videos, but I'm always going to remember seeing Avis in this dress when someone says a person lit up a room, because this is what they mean. There was just a presence about her. You would know she was there, even if she wasn't trying to be noticed. The big smile, the high cheekbones, and her gentle, sweet nature made her stand out. After high school, Avis enrolled in Hines Community College in Vicksburg, and when she graduated in May of 1999, guess who made sure he charged the camcorder to capture the memorable moment? Yes, Fred. There he was, documenting the entire day from the minute they stepped foot out of the house until Avis walked across that stage. Frina remembers him being more excited about Avis graduating than she was. He was so proud of her. It reminds me so much of my own dad, and I'm sure many of you can relate. There's someone in your family that probably does this, or maybe you do it with your kids. But Avis Marie Banks received her diploma, graduating cum laude. She had told her family to please not clap for her, but they couldn't hold back. Later, Deborah told her daughter that of course she was going to holler. She was going to let it be known that that was her daughter walking across the stage. It just goes to show you how much pride and joy Avis's family had for her. After this, she enrolled at Alcorn State University in Jackson, Mississippi. not too far from her parents, but far enough away that she could be more independent. She was majoring in child development, and over the next few years she got to experience the exciting and life-changing chapter that college is. In Jackson, there were more people to meet, places to shop, and things to do. But still, Avis was more introverted, so she didn't go out that much. That meant she could put more time and energy into her classes. She ended up graduating with honors in 2001, receiving her bachelor's degree in childhood development. She was the first person in her family to graduate from a university with a bachelor's degree, and her mom, dad, and sisters were so proud of her. Avis decided after graduating that she had a couple of important goals for her life. First, she wanted to open her own daycare. She absolutely adored children and was really passionate about making daycare affordable for parents in need. She spent her early 20s talking to her father all the time about her plan and trying to figure out how she could make this dream a reality. She actually wanted to open 2 daycares, one that would be owned as a family and the other that would be hers. Both would provide low or no-cost childcare to underprivileged children and families struggling to make ends meet. Many parents face difficulties finding an affordable daycare that actually offers a quality education to their children. She was determined to bridge that gap and make her daycare center accessible. You can tell how much Avis respected her family. She wanted to make sure that if she became successful, she could also make sure to take care of her family and ensure they had something to benefit from as well by opening up that second daycare. After all, they had helped her achieve her goals as she was growing up. Avis's second goal was to have children of her own, and of course, she wanted to be swept off her feet. It's true, Avis wanted a husband and a family one day, but she had set her standards high. She wanted someone who was on her level when it came to earning potential and education, someone with the same values who was dedicated to success. She knew all that would come in time, but at the moment, she decided to get a job as an assistant director for a local daycare. This would give her the experience she needed to go out on her own in the future, and she had plans to obtain her master's degree while putting her other goals into motion. Avis had moved back to Vicksburg and continued to spend a lot of time with her younger sister while working at the daycare. She would excitedly talk about all the babies whenever she got a chance. She specialized in children under 2. One evening in early 2004, Avis, who was 24 at the time, and Frina were at the local gym together. Something that they did on a regular basis, but this time, while they were working out, this very charismatic young man approached Avis. He had these piercing eyes, short-cut hair, was well-groomed, and had a nice smile. Most of all, he had this air of confidence about him. He asked Avis if she would mind speaking with him for a moment. Ferdina, jokingly thinking, yes, we mind, because she was very protective of Avis and never thought anyone was good enough for her perfect sister. But Avis decided to step away and give this gentleman a chance to speak with her. He introduced himself as Keyon Pittman and said he also lived in Vicksburg. They started talking, and Avis thought, you know what? I kind of like this guy. They had a lot of things in common. Keyon had also gone to Alcorn State University, but he was 29, 4 years older than Avis, so they had not run into each other in college. But they were both living comfortably in Vicksburg and loved it there. Keyon also loved kids. He was actually teaching in a public school in Tallulah, Louisiana, which is about a 30-minute drive from Vicksburg, and he was really passionate about fitness and living a healthy lifestyle. All of this appealed to Avis, so she exchanged numbers with him. Then, when she got back to her sister after chatting for about 10 minutes, Ferdina, of course, wanted to know how it went and what he had to say. Avis said, "Oh, not much, we just talked," but she could tell that Avis was excited. And it was true. After meeting Keyon, she couldn't stop talking about him. The connection between them was strong. She would share stories with her family about their conversations and their interests. Eventually, Avis agreed to go on a date with Keyon, and then another and another. Avis was smitten. It was clear to everyone around her that she had fallen in love. And Keyon? He was a charmer. He's been described as not quite the looker, but very charismatic. However, when it came to why Keyon fell for Avis, it was kind of obvious for those on the outside. She was beautiful, of course, there's more to her, but at first glance, her skin was glowing, she had the cutest little nose, and she had these super expressive eyes. Just by looking at her, you could tell she also had a kind soul. She wore her hair straight a lot, but when she would let her natural curls out, she was absolutely stunning. Everyone considered Avis to be this gentle, sweet sunflower. She had this very positive, bright energy to her, and she was willing to give to other people all the time. Everyone who loved her just hoped that she would find someone who loved her just as much. When Fred and Deborah met Keyon, they really liked him. He was college educated, he had a good job, he took care of himself, had great manners, and valued everything Avis valued. I think this is a great time to tell you a little more about Keyon's life. He'd grown up in Picayune, Mississippi, a town close to New Orleans, and he visited his family on a regular basis. Keyon graduated from Alcorn State with 3 degrees, including biology, PE, and health sciences. He planned to go to medical school, but after he started looking into it, he realized it was going to be pretty rough on his mental health, so he embarked on a teaching career. He was still interested in natural medicine, and he enjoyed basketball. Fred had a high opinion of Keyon. He called him a great provider and the son he never had, and Avis adored him. Fred and Deborah knew how much Keyon meant to Avis, and they were so excited to see their daughter happy. It was a match made in heaven, and after a year, they were still going just as strong. Then Avis and Keyon revealed they were moving in together. For Fred and Deborah, this was exciting but a little bittersweet. Keyon had gotten a job offer in Jackson, Mississippi, which was about a 50-minute drive. This job paid a lot better than his current one, so Keyon was going to be working as a 6th grade science teacher at Chastain Middle School, and he would also be the boys' basketball coach over the winter, which paid a little extra. Avis decided it would be best for her life journey to move in with him and scope out job opportunities together. They bought a brand new home in Ridgeland, a suburb in Jackson with a population of about 20,000 people. They moved into the house at the tail end of 2005 when Avis was 26 and Keyon was 30. The house was in a cute, safe neighborhood called the Blackthorn Subdivision at the far end of Lincolnshire Boulevard. It sat at 708 Old Square Court. It was a 3-bedroom house with a garage and a quiet neighborhood without many trees, but a nice big yard. It's located on a cul-de-sac. The housing in this area was affordable, and the neighborhood consisted of new couples who were starting to raise their families. It was also the perfect distance for Keyon to drive to work. He preferred to commute, and it was only about a 25-minute drive from the middle school. To help bring in even more income, Keyon got a part-time bartending job in his off time. This was at a Mexican restaurant called On the Border Mexican Cantina, which wasn't far from the middle school, only about 8 minutes. So for a few days after school each week, he would pick up shifts for some extra cash, and you can't beat the tips you get when you're bartending or serving. That summer, Avis was excited to come to Chastain Middle School to help Keyon prepare his classroom for the incoming 6th graders. He introduced one of his colleagues to Avis, and she recalled how beautiful this lady was. Just gorgeous. Avis also remembered how Keyon's eyes lit up when he introduced them. He made it known right away that Avis was his girlfriend, and you could tell how happy they were together. While all of this was going on, and they were settling in, Avis was still holding on to her dream of owning her own daycare. Her dad had even driven up from Vicksburg a couple of times to help her look at rental spaces where she could open up her own company. She was really serious about starting her own business, but life was getting busy. After the move in 2005, Avis landed a 9-to-5 job at Bright Horizons Daycare, a company that provided daytime childcare to Blue Cross Blue Shield employees. She worked Monday through Friday and had the weekends free. She specifically worked with babies and children under 2. According to Avis's boss, she was a wonderful employee, quiet, always on time, got along with everyone, valued teamwork, and was an absolute natural when it came to taking care of kids. Avis's boss was not the only one who had glowing reviews. In March of 2006, Avis and Keyon got new neighbors when Johnny Coleman and his kids moved in next door. Avis and Keyon stopped by to introduce themselves. Johnny said they were super welcoming and friendly and that they seemed like a very happy couple. He said Avis was very soft-spoken and introverted but pleasant to be around. She spent a lot of time in her house, and her favorite moments were spent having quality time at home with Keyon and her family. In August 2006, Avis had some big news. She found out that she was pregnant. They weren't planning on this happening right away, but they both agreed they definitely wanted kids and were excited to be expecting. Fredina remembers the day she found out she was going to be an aunt. Avis called one morning, and their mother answered the phone. Fredina was close by and could hear her mother excitedly asking questions. She wanted to know what was going on, so Deborah handed the phone to her youngest daughter, and Avis asked her, "Are you sitting down?" That's when she told her sister she was going to be an auntie. This was going to be Fredina's first niece or nephew, so she was very excited. When Fred and Deborah found out, they were overjoyed. But the truth is, they weren't really that happy about the fact that their daughter was having a child out of wedlock. So they did put a little pressure on Avis and Keyon to get married. This was fine with Avis. She was 27 now and down to get married at any time. Keyon was really excited. He told all of his coworkers the big news, and one of them asked him if wedding bells were coming soon. That's when he kind of shyly said, "Oh, I know where you're going with that question. Yes, we're gonna get married soon." Keyon did end up proposing to Avis that fall, and they set their wedding date for a few months later, in the new year, mid-January 2007. That way, maybe she wouldn't be showing as much. She would only be about 6 months pregnant, and everything was falling into place. But life was continuing to get busier for the couple, and they were experiencing the stress of balancing all the parts of their lives. In August, Keyon started the new school year at Chastain Middle School. Every day, he left for work at 7 a.m., got out of school at 3:30, ran some errands, went back to school, and then coached the basketball team. He would finally get home around 7:30 or 8 o'clock. On the evenings and weekends when he wasn't coaching, he was working his part-time bartending job. On those nights, he would come home even later, but he was putting in the work to pay for their wedding, and of course, their new baby coming soon. Avis was super busy herself. Not only was she excitedly planning a wedding and a space for their new baby in their home, but she was still working full-time, doing housework, spending time with her parents, and planning to open her own daycare, all while being pregnant, going to all her appointments, experiencing morning sickness, cravings, you name it. By November of 2006, her baby bump was just starting to show through her clothes, and she was exhausted. Excited to be a mom, but exhausted. She did find out the baby's gender. It was a boy, and she and Keyon had already decided on a name, Kellen. Avis and Keyon told their families about the new baby's name over Thanksgiving break, when they traveled to Picayune to visit Keon's family, as well as to Houston to spend time at Deborah's for Thanksgiving dinner with Avis's family. But at both celebrations, Keyon was acting a bit strange. While Avis was hanging out with his mom, Keyon was gone for hours from the home. At Deborah's house, Keyon was on his phone all the time. He seemed really absent from the conversations and would go outside to take phone calls, which, if you ask me, is a little sketchy. Why can't you just have the phone call in front of everyone else at dinner? Fred noticed that Avis was feeling some type of way about Keyon's behavior. He said, "I remember Avis was just sitting across from him, and he walked by on his phone. Avis kind of looked at him, gave him a little look." It's hard to know what she was thinking during Thanksgiving break, but obviously, Keyon had a lot going on. When the family asked him what was up, he said he was having some family issues and was speaking to his mother. Avis's family totally understood, but Keyon was always a little bit sketchy, like you couldn't quite tell if something else was going on or who he was talking to. He had a lot of friends. Fred and Deborah knew that Avis was head over heels for him. She trusted him. But they started to wonder if Keyon returned those feelings completely. He was charismatic, but he was definitely flaky. Still, since they trusted Avis, they trusted her judgment. The last time Fred and Deborah saw Keyon and Avis together was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. They drove up to Ridgeland to spend time with their daughter and help her decorate her house for Christmas. Fred helped Keyon put up those hanging icicle lights from the roof. They lit up all these candy canes right in front of the porch area and had a Christmas tree made of a swirling strand of lights in the front yard. Avis invited her family over for Christmas, and they were looking forward to going to church and spending the rest of the holidays together. But I want to fast forward to Wednesday, November 29th. When Avis was getting off work, she got a call from Keyon at 5:12 p.m. He told her he was on his way to basketball practice and that he'd see her later. She left the Bright Horizons location on Lakeland Drive at 5:15 p.m., feeling tired after a long day. At 5:36, she gave Keyon another call. She asked about his plans for dinner, and he said he'd take care of everything when he got home from basketball practice. Satisfied with his answer, Avis drove the rest of the way to their house. She stopped in front of it to pick up the mail from the mailbox. This was her usual routine. She would drive up, get out of her car, check the mail, then get back in her car and drive up to their garage. She would open the garage door with the remote in her car, drive inside, and then make sure the garage door was completely shut before getting out. She was pretty street smart and always made sure to be safe, acknowledging her surroundings in case something happened. Well, something did happen. Something horrible and devastating. Keyon's whereabouts over the course of the night are all over the place, and I'll get into that later. But one thing is certain. When Keyon got home around 8:30 that evening, he opened the garage door and found his pregnant fiancée collapsed next to her Honda Accord. Avis was lying right next to the driver's door in a large pool of blood that was trailing down the slope of the garage floor toward the driveway. She was still wearing her work scrubs, along with a light jacket, and her keys were clenched in her hand, showing that she had been attacked as soon as she got out of her car. Avis's purse and some of the pieces of mail were scattered all around her body. Keyon ran to Avis. He tried waking her up, hugging her, shaking her, crying, and even kissed her on the lips. But sadly, she was gone. She had already passed away. Keyon noticed that her pants had been pulled down, and his heart just broke in an absolute flood of emotion. Keyon raced into the house and all around it, trying to see if the culprit was still on the scene. There was no one to be found. The house was a disaster. There were papers everywhere, drawers opened. It was completely ransacked. It looked like Avis and Keyon were the victims of a burglary gone wrong. Keyon raced back to his fiancée's body, and this is where things get weird. Instead of calling 911 from his cell phone, which he had on him, he frantically ran to the neighbor's house and started banging on their door. The couple who lived next door had no idea what was happening. All they saw was this man running, knocking, and yelling at the top of his lungs, trying to get into their house. The woman picked up her phone and dialed 911. On this recording, the neighbor begins to make her noise complaint, saying that there's this man outside hollering and banging on her door, and she told the operator that he was running from door to door doing the same thing in the neighborhood. But while on the line, she looks out the window and realizes she recognized him. She tells the operator she thinks it's her neighbor, so she sends her husband out there to go check. That's when she hears her husband yell, "Call 911. She said, "Why? What is going on?" And her husband yelled, "Somebody killed his wife." In a panic, this woman relayed to the operator that their neighbor said someone killed his wife. Keyon went back to where Avis was lying and remained there until the police showed up. He also called Deborah for a second time that night. The first time had been when Keyon was driving home from basketball practice. He had called Deborah around 8:31 to say Avis wasn't picking up her phone, and he was really worried about her. He wanted to know if Deborah had heard from Avis in the past few hours. Deborah thought that was very out of character for Keyon, because he had never called to say he was concerned about Avis before. Maybe she was watching her favorite TV show, or she fell asleep. So when Deborah got another call from Keyon around 8:45, she picked it up, wondering what he was going to say now. On the other end of the line, he was screaming and his words were jumbled. She said, "Keyon, what is going on? Where's Avis? He just said that she and Fred needed to get over to Ridgeland now. Something happened to Avis. I can only imagine what was going on in Fred and Deborah's minds when they got that call. They were preparing for bed on a Wednesday night in the middle of a long work week, and they get this call from their future son-in-law saying that it's urgent and to come over now. They fluctuated between panic and confusion, and thoughts were whirling around in their minds. Was Avis hurt? Did she fall? Was the baby okay? Deborah suspected it must be a miscarriage. She knew it was imperative that she'd be there for her daughter to support her through one of the most heartbreaking things that can ever happen to a woman, if that was the case. But it turned out to be much worse. Fredina heard her mother screaming from the other room as she was in the middle of giving her baby son a bath. She was alarmed, so she asked, "What is going on?" Deborah simply handed Fredina the phone and said, "It's Keyon. He's saying something's wrong with Avis." Fredina got on the phone, and again, Keyon repeated what he told Deborah, that they needed to get over there now. Fredina was like, "For what? What's going on?" But Keyon just hung up. Deborah, Fred, Fredina, and her baby jumped into the car, and they drove the 55 miles east to the Jackson suburbs. When they pulled up to Old Square Court, Avis's family was anticipating her house to be lit up by Christmas lights on the dark, quiet street, and it was lit up with Christmas lights but also with police lights as well. Fredina just remembers seeing a bunch of cops, an ambulance, and yellow police tape around Avis's home. There were a bunch of neighbors along the edge of the property who were trying to figure out what was going on. Deborah walked slowly up to the house. It was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. As soon as Fred saw that crime scene tape, he knew in his gut that something really bad had happened to Avis, and that nothing would ever be the same. As they joined the crowd around the house, they ran into Keyon, who was just screaming and crying, not making any sense. Fredina was like, "Keyon, you gotta get up and you gotta tell us what's going on." But he was unable to speak. Finally, it was the coroner who came up to the family and said in these words, "Your daughter is deceased. She died a horrible death." Wow, how absolutely devastating those words are. There's no good way to deliver that kind of news, and it is the truth. Fred and Deborah lost their beloved middle daughter and the grandson they were so excited to meet. Avis was 5 months pregnant. Her unborn baby was a victim of this vicious murder as well. From their vantage point, Avis's mom and dad could see their future son-in-law sitting in a cop car, and they were confused as to why. They figured he was just going to be questioned so they could figure out what happened to Avis. Because of course he wouldn't be involved, right? He couldn't be. He was like a son to the Banks family, but we know that most women are sadly killed by someone close to them, and who was closer to Avis than Keyon. All they could do was wait. So let's go back to the crime scene. Investigators had arrived at 8:46 p.m. and found Keyon hovering over Avis's body, with blood all over his hands, pants, and shirt. Lieutenant Neal and Detective Frank Dillard of the Ridgeland Police Department immediately took steps to secure the crime scene and figure out what happened. They told Keyon he needed to back up, but Keyon didn't want to leave Avis's side. It took a lot of convincing to get him to wait in that patrol car. Then the paramedics arrived, confirming that Avis had passed away, as well as her unborn son. Avis had been shot, and one of the bullets had missed, hitting the bottom left corner of the garage door. There was a hole right through it. But that wasn't all. A knife or sharp-bladed object had been used to stab her multiple times, and she was slashed across her throat. There were no signs of a struggle. It appeared that everything happened so fast that Avis was in shock when she passed away. It didn't seem like she saw this coming at all. And what kind of monster could have done this? We know Avis. She spent her time working hard, being with her family, and giving back to others. So who in the world would want to hurt such a lovely person? Lieutenant Neal looked over the crime scene. First, they started looking in the garage for evidence. They found that bullet hole in the garage door, but when they tried to look for shell casings, it turns out there were none. So either all these shells had been meticulously and carefully picked up from the floor, or a revolver had been used, because they don't leave empty cartridges behind. They remain in the cylinder. They did a walkthrough of the home and realized someone had slammed the back door open with such force that the doorknob dented the wall. It left an impression. Lieutenant Neal wondered if this was a sign of anger or if the perpetrator was just in a hurry to get into that house. They also found Avis's blood on the wall between the garage and the house, as well as on a light switch near the back door. They found several really important pieces of evidence. To get into the house, the perpetrator had walked past the garage door to the back door, which had a glass panel on it. They attempted to force it open by kicking it, leaving dirty shoe prints behind on the glass. They were able to measure the prints, took pictures of them, and lifted them from the glass. After analyzing them, they determined that they were men's size 8 shoes. The forensic team also noticed they had a very distinctive tread pattern, so they made sure to document the prints carefully to analyze them and try to match them if any other shoes were found in this investigation. This is where it gets really interesting. The house was a mess, which made sense for a burglary or robbery, but there was nothing missing from the house. Expensive jewelry, electronics, and other easily pawnable items were all left behind. Detective Neal said that the house did not look right to veteran officers. Someone had unplugged all the electronic devices and stacked them up, but they didn't steal a single one. Then they went to the main bedroom, opened every other drawer in the dresser, and rummaged through them. He said they even went into the bathroom and did the same thing to the bathroom cabinets, every drawer. Lieutenant Neal had never seen a robber go through a bathroom like that, because people don't usually keep their valuable items in the bathroom. So what was this perpetrator looking for? How close were they to Avis that they could have known where to look in her bathroom for something? That's when they started to question whether the scene was staged. Lieutenant Neal also took notice that Avis's scrub pants had been pulled down, and it was easy to jump to conclusions. But there were no signs of a struggle. Since the robbery seemed staged, he wondered if this could be staged as well. In Neal's 20 years as a detective, he had seen a lot of crimes of passion and failed attempts at covering up evidence. And this seemed like one of those cases where the perpetrator was trying to throw off the investigators. He was also shocked and horrified by Avis's multiple wounds inflicted by 2 different types of weapons. It appeared to be overkill, and she sustained what he considered defacing injuries. He decided that this murder was driven by rage or revenge. Someone had hurt Avis with a motive and wanted to make sure she was dead, possibly her unborn baby too. During the initial search, police were not able to find any fingerprints or DNA evidence in the house that wasn't Keyon's or Avis's. They even brought in a police dog, but no luck. The dog was like, "Nope, can't smell any strangers here." Naturally, the police wondered if Keyon was the one who had done this, the same guy who was sitting in their car waiting to be taken back to the station for questioning. He knew the exact time Avis got off work. He knew Avis better than anyone, and he, more than anyone, had a motive. I mean, if you look at the statistics for the majority of women who are murdered, most of the time it's their boyfriend, husband, or ex. Domestic altercations are a huge issue. Not to mention, Keyon was the one who found Avis, but he hadn't even called 911. So what was going on with this guy? Keyon was taken back to the station for questioning by Detective Dillard, and it was clear that Dillard was going to put him through the ringer. Keyon was expressing all kinds of emotions, including grief, anger, and denial, and he just kept getting on his phone, calling people, texting nonstop. The detective noticed that Keyon appeared remarkably calm and relaxed, which struck him as peculiar given the gravity of the situation he had just experienced. How could he look so unbothered? Keyon had made a lot of phone calls while sitting in the police car in the waiting room, and before the interview started, Detective Dillard overheard Keyon say to someone over the phone, "I don't like this at all. These mother effers think that I had something to do with this." So, Detective Dillard wondered what the issue was. Keyon explained that he felt as though he was being targeted, that he was being looked at as a suspect from the get-go. But the detective explained that this was actually a routine interview. Everyone was going to go through an interview like this if they were close to Avis. Keyon was the one who found Avis, and being very close to her, it was obvious that he would be questioned. If he truly cared about finding out what happened to his fiancée, he would cooperate with the investigators as best he could. Detective Dillard began by asking Keyon some easier questions about his line of work and his outfit. Surprisingly, Keyon actually laughed a few times and even tried to make a couple of jokes. This could have been a trauma response. Sometimes people laugh when they receive unexpected news. However, it could also be a sign that Keyon was emotionally detached from what happened to Avis, didn't know how to handle it, or perhaps didn't trust the detectives. Maybe he thought they were going to imprison him on the spot without having any evidence that he did anything wrong. It's impossible to imagine all the thoughts running through Keyon's head during this interview. But when Detective Dillard heard Keyon laughing, he had to remind him that he was at the police station because his bride-to-be and unborn son had been murdered. Detective Dillard noticed that Keyon was self-absorbed, frequently turning questions around to talk more about himself. He complained about how he was being treated, almost as if he were victimizing himself to distract from the topics at hand. At one point, Keyon even claimed that Detective Dillard wouldn't let him use the bathroom, to which Dillard responded that he had already been allowed to use the bathroom. Keyon countered that he hadn't interpreted it that way. While grieving, Keyon might not have been in the most rational mindset, but that doesn't excuse being unhelpful, especially when the police were trying to figure out what happened to his fiancée. A few things particularly bothered Detective Dillard. The first was why Keyon didn't call 911 from his cell phone right away. He not only went into the house, but also hadn't called when he came back outside. When questioned about this, Keyon's excuse was that he didn't want to pay for roaming charges. For those who remember when cell phone plans only included certain areas, making calls outside those boundaries could incur extra charges. But this was an emergency. It was 911, and it was his fiancée. It seemed odd that he would stop and think about roaming charges at a time like that. He insisted that he didn't know where the 911 call would be routed, didn't think it would go through, and didn't want to waste time. Detective Dillard then asked Keyon to recount what he did that day. Keyon said he spent his day teaching at CH Middle School, as usual. After work, he ran some errands, including picking up groceries to bring home that evening after basketball practice, which began at 5:30 and lasted until about 7:30 or 7:45 p.m. He didn't want the groceries to spoil, so he asked a fellow coach who lived near the school if he could put them in their fridge and retrieve them quickly once practice was over. That's what he did. He dropped them off around 5 p.m., left around 5:10 p.m., and even called Avis on the way to the school gym. They talked once again just after practice started when Avis called to ask what was for dinner. He told her he'd be bringing food home. Keyon finished up around 7:45 or so, left the school, picked up his groceries, and went home. While driving, he called Avis, but she didn't answer, which made him concerned. That's when he called her mother, Deborah, to ask if she'd heard from her, and she hadn't. We know what happened next. The detective had more questions, but Keyon refused to talk as soon as he was read his Miranda rights. Keyon stated that he was going to need to hire an attorney, especially if they were going to tell him he was innocent, but treat him like a suspect. He complained that in the United States it seems like you're guilty until proven innocent, ignoring the fact that his behavior was making him look guilty. Keyon did hire an attorney, Antoine Patrick, who later shed more light on how Keyon was treated during his interview. Allegedly, the police had told Keyon multiple times to sit down and shut up, and Detective Dillard questioned him until 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That's a long time, and while this might have been a slight exaggeration, it seemed like both parties in this interview clashed. Was Keyon being difficult because the police were keeping him there so long, or were the police keeping him there so long because he was being difficult? Either way, Keyon stopped talking and sought the advice of counsel, which is something everyone should do if they're ever being questioned in relation to any crime, especially a murder. Before letting him go, investigators photographed Keyon's clothing. He was wearing a blue and white pinstripe dress shirt. It was a button-down polo, a gold chain, khaki pants, and a white undershirt. There was a blood stain on the top left under his shoulder area and more on his left sleeve. Another spot was on the bottom left, closer to his pants. There was also a bunch of blood streaked between the leg areas of his khakis, as well as on various other places on those pants, like the cuffs by the ankles. However, there didn't appear to be any blood on his shoes, which were lace-ups with brown leather and blue cloth. They did take swabs of Keyon's hands, which had a noticeable amount of blood on them, even under his fingernails. And on his hands, they wanted to make sure there wasn't any gunpowder residue on them, so they did a GSR test. This test actually came back positive for gunpowder, but there was only a single particle on each hand. It's highly possible that residue rubbed off from Avis's clothing when Keyon held her in his arms. That could also explain why her blood was on his clothing. Keyon left the interview outraged at the way he was treated. Police had taken his cell phone, his clothing, and Avis's car in as evidence, and they got a search warrant for Keyon's car, leaving him in a very vulnerable position. He didn't trust Detective Neal and Dillard at all. No matter how many times they reassured him that he was not a suspect, he didn't believe them. While Keyon was hard for the police to stomach, there was not enough evidence to charge him with a crime. They did find a pair of shoes in the trunk of his car, but they didn't match the tread from the print left on the back door. However, they were a men's size 8, the exact same size as the prints left behind by the perpetrator. So, this definitely keeps him on their radar. It didn't matter whether they liked him or not. This wasn't enough evidence to hold him. Maybe he was just grieving in his own way, and that's why he needed to leave town. Because that's what he did. It was a detective's job to find out who killed them, be it Keyon or someone else. Keyon ended up leaving Jackson for a while to be with his family. After November 29th, he got a substitute teacher to cover his classes, and he quit his bartending job at the Mexican restaurant. This could be seen as running away to get the prying eyes off of him, but it didn't matter right now. Investigators had to put all the evidence together. They spent the next few days going door to door in the neighborhood and putting together a timeline for Avis's death. They believed, from her phone records and her GPS information, that Avis called and talked to Keyon at 5:12 p.m. and again at 5:36 p.m. that evening when she was driving home from work. She arrived home between 5:50 and 6 p.m. They think she was killed shortly thereafter. They talked to Johnny Coleman, Avis's next-door neighbor. Now, he hadn't been around to call the police that night. He had actually driven his children home from school at 4:30 that day, and they had spent the whole evening indoors trying to ignore the construction workers. The workers stopped a little before 6 p.m., which would be around the time that Avis was ambushed coming home from work. When Johnny left for his night shift at 7:45, Avis's garage door was shut with the Christmas lights on outside her home. Everything looked normal. I wondered, were the Christmas lights usually turned on at this time? Did Avis turn them on when she got home? It doesn't seem like she would have had time. Or did the perpetrator turn them on? I'm genuinely wondering where the lights were plugged in, and I wasn't able to find any information on that. Maybe they were on a timer. I know that I've had ones like that before, but I just got this haunting image in my mind of Avis's murderer turning on the lights to make everything look normal, and that literally gives me chills. It's so creepy, especially since we know that they were inside of the house. The police ran into a bunch of dead ends with the neighbors since Avis's garage door was shut, so they started digging into Keyon's life. First, they looked at his cell phone records. At 6 p.m., his cell phone pinged to a tower near Chastain Middle School. The rest of the evening, he moved around a lot, but none of the messages filtered through the Lake Harbor Drive cell tower, and that's the tower closest to his and Avis's house. Keyon was still a suspect, but investigators needed to find a witness who could confirm that Keyon was in the area that night, or even owned a gun. When detectives went to the Mexican restaurant where Keyon worked, they started asking the other bartenders, the servers, and the regulars questions about him, and they cracked open a huge bombshell. According to Keyon's coworkers, he was quite the ladies' man. Why did I see this part coming? They said that he had regulars coming in all the time to see him. Now, I mean, that's not too uncommon for bartenders, But they go one step further. Instead, they witnessed Keyon flirting with women constantly. Still, not that out of the norm for a bartender, but it didn't end there. He had been seen kissing not just one woman, but several different women, who his coworkers referred to as his girlfriends. Yeah, so they would come in and visit him, and they would leave together at the end of his shifts. It was almost as though he had this side job to meet girls on the side. It was clear that Keyon was living a double life. He was a player. If Avis had any idea, she never told any of her friends or family about it. But it's unlikely that she knew the whole story. When we love someone, it's really hard to imagine that they wouldn't be loyal until it's uncovered. Somehow, we want to trust them. And Avis didn't go visit Keyon at the bar very often, so he could meet up with whoever he pleased at his workplace. Police were not surprised to hear about Keyon's affairs because they overheard him calling someone babe over the phone in that initial interview room. That's right. When he was complaining about the detectives, he referred to the person on the other line as babe. So detectives made a note of it, and now they know why. But Keyon cheating on Avis didn't mean that he was her murderer. Maybe he did love her, and maybe he just couldn't handle the commitment. But if he didn't love her, well, that would be a great motive. Avis was pregnant with his child. Did Keyon just not want to be tied down? Was he the Chris Watts type of guy, a guy who thought he knew what he wanted but met someone else and changed his mind? So he took matters into his own hands and ended Avis's life so that he wouldn't have to have a kid around. It's a sickening thought, but it happens. This is not nearly enough evidence to charge Keyon with anything, so police decided to follow a lead. One of Keyon's restaurant co-workers had mentioned the name of one of the women he was seeing. Her name was Carla Hughes. She frequented the bar on the nights that Keyon worked, and she also happened to be one of his co-workers at the school. The teachers would go out and hang out together, going to eat at nearby restaurants, but Carla would come in on her own to see Keyon outside of work-related activities. Now, no one blatantly said they knew Keyon and Carla were more than friends. They just mentioned her coming in regularly over the past few months. Detective Dillard went to Chastain Middle School on December 1st, 2 days after Avis was killed. He was there to interview Keyon's colleagues, especially Carla Hughes. When he asked to speak with her, she immediately burst into tears. She was hysterically crying, and this looked suspicious. Detective Dillard asked her if she knew Avis, and that's why she was upset. Carla said she knew of her, but did not know her personally. She was crying because she and Keyon worked together, they both coached together, and she was sad about what he was going through. Something so horrible. Dillard couldn't really conduct a proper interview because she was so emotional. So he scheduled a private interview with her later that evening after she was done with work. Then he went around the school asking questions about Keyon and Carla. You already know who Keyon is, but this is what they learned about Carla. The 25-year-old language arts teacher was from Greenville, Mississippi. She was born on June 12, 1981, and when she was only 6 weeks old, she was adopted by her uncle Carl and her aunt Linda Hughes. Her biological mother's cousin, Carla, went to T.L. Weston High School and regularly attended Mercy Seat Baptist Church. Her parents were school teachers and close friends with the pastor, the mayor, and other big names in town. Let me tell you, Carla was involved in everything: tennis, soccer, basketball, band, dancing, cheerleading, Key Club, the mayor's youth council, the Mississippi State Senate, and the list goes on. She excelled in horseback riding and beauty pageants. She finished 6th in the world in a horse showing competition at the age of 14. She won many awards and was an honor student. She was also voted most likely to succeed in life by her high school graduating class. Carla was a popular cheerleader growing up. She brought enthusiasm and spirit to the sidelines of every game. She was also a talented musician and played in the school band. Carla's involvement in different activities didn't stop there. She was happily engaged in her community, always seeking opportunities to make a positive impact. Her bubbly personality and her natural charisma made her everyone's favorite. She was well liked by her classmates and teachers alike. Carla earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Southern Mississippi in the early 2000s. Next, she earned her Master's of Education degree from B. Haven College in Jackson, Mississippi. And then she began taking graduate coursework in education at Delta State University while she was working at an elementary school. But then she decided to take the job as a 7th grade language arts teacher at Chastain Middle School in August, right before school started. Her parents were worried because everything happened so suddenly. She actually had to move nearby until she settled in. This wasn't the best part of town. She actually had a break-in less than 3 months after moving in. This was in early October. Someone actually tried to get into her back door, and she reported it to the Jackson Police Department. She was looking to relocate soon, but she loved her job, which came with a higher salary. She was the cheerleading coach, and she enjoyed making new friends with other teachers, including Keyon. Everyone the detectives talked to said they loved Carla. She was really popular with the students as well as her coworkers. They said that she had a close relationship with fellow teachers, including Coach Keyon Pittman. They had a habit of having long conversations outside of the office, calling each other and hanging out after class. When asked if they thought Keyon and Carla were more than friends, no one could be 100% certain, but they wouldn't be surprised if they were. Later that evening, Carla and Detective Dillard had an 80-minute interview at the police station. During Carla's interview, she presented herself as personable, friendly, and helpful. The detectives asked her to recount what she did the day that Avis was murdered. She told them she saw Keyon while they were both dismissing their students at the end of the day, and that's when he mentioned he was going grocery shopping. He asked her if he could put his food in her fridge while he went to basketball practice. She said yes, that would be fine, and that's what he did. Keyon had gotten groceries after school from Rainbow Whole Foods and dropped the groceries off at 4:40 p.m. in Carla's fridge. Carla's apartment was between Rainbow Whole Foods and Chastain Middle School, so her place was a natural quick stop between errands and going to basketball practice. She said that Keyon dropped off the groceries and left for practice. Carla went to the gym to work out. Keyon then called her while he was at practice to figure out when he could come back and pick up the groceries. She promised that she was on her way home to take a shower, but he could pick them up at any time. Keyon got off basketball practice at 7:30 p.m. Man stopped by her apartment for the groceries around 7:50. Carla said they chatted for a few minutes, and then she started to get ready for bed and called her mother. That is when he left to drive home. They asked her the next time she heard from him, although they already knew the answer from Keyon's phone records. She told detectives Keyon called her around 8:45 p.m. She was speaking with her mom and put her on hold to answer his call. She thought he was just going to say, "Hey, I made it home," and say goodnight. But instead he screamed, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" saying it over and over again. He told her that she needed to come to his house as fast as possible, that someone hurt Avis. Then Carla said that Keyon described the scene to her, that it looked like their house had been robbed, that there was stuff everywhere, and Avis was lying unresponsive next to her car in a pool of blood under her head. There was blood scattered all around her body. Carla was overwhelmed. She was confused. She got back on the phone with her mom and told her everything. Carla asked her mom if she should go help Keyon, and her mom said, "No, don't go over there. That's ridiculous. It's a crime scene." So Carla chose not to drive out and support Keyon, even though Keyon called her a couple more times over the course of that evening, while he was sitting in the police car and while he was at the station. Detectives thought this was really suspicious, especially because they knew he didn't call 911. Instead, he was calling another woman. They asked Carla if Keyon usually called her after he got off work, and she said yes, they do keep in touch. It makes sense. They're both coaches, and there are basketball and cheerleading schedules, as well as school events, so they may have to call and ask each other questions. But still, detectives wanted to understand the nature of these calls. Carla insisted they were innocent. As a matter of fact, Keyon had even talked to Carla with Avis right there. For instance, when he and Carla and their colleagues were out after work, Keyon would call Avis and name off everyone who was there, including Carla. She said that Avis knew she was one of Keyon's friends and coworkers. Carla told police that she respected that Keyon was engaged to be married and she didn't want more than a casual fling. She never told him to break up with Avis. She respected Avis as well, even though she didn't know her personally. Carla said she even stored her motorcycle at Keyon's house for a while, and Avis didn't have a problem with her doing that. Wow, so this is a lot. Detective Dillard heard her story and found it plausible, since it matched up with everything Keyon already told them. But the casual way that Carla was talking about everything really did seem weird. During the interview, she got a phone call from someone, and Detective Dillard noticed right away. She answered it calmly and jumped right back into the interview. At first, Carla had been breaking down, crying about Avis's death, and now she's talking about it completely collected. Oh, Detective Dillard wasn't sure what to think. Let's be real, Carla working out at the time of Avis's death wasn't the best alibi unless there were cameras at the gym or somebody had seen her. Everyone is a suspect. They can't simply toss out the idea that Keyon and Carla being each other's alibis meant that maybe both of them had been involved. So he asked Carla if she owned a gun, and she said no, she did not. Then he asked her if she had access to a gun, and she said no, but that her dad had a lot of guns because he was a hunter. Finally, Dillard asked Carla what she thought about the fact that Avis and her child had died, and Carla's response was that it was very, very unfortunate. Detectives spent the next couple of days after Carla's interview trying to process all of the evidence and information they received. Then they began interviewing other people in the community. Any tips were welcome. They tried desperately to get in touch with Keyon because they really wanted to interview him now that Carla explained what their relationship was really like. But he had mysteriously vanished off the face of the earth, which was pretty strange. With Carla and Keyon acting so suspiciously, the detectives had to wonder if they really were in on this together. Was one of them the murderer and the other an accomplice? If so, which one? Or was it someone else entirely? That's what they needed to find out. Their biggest piece of evidence from the crime scene were the .38 caliber bullets that were recovered from Avis's body and the shoe prints. They had already searched through Keyon's things at his house and were unable to locate any shoes that had the same tread as the ones that were left on that back door. But remember that they were the right size. So, could he have gotten rid of them somehow? Before they could even begin to look into that, the police got a tip. But since I haven't even told you about the autopsy, I'm going to quickly explain what was ascertained from that exam, and then proceed to let you know about the first big break in this case. As I stated, 4.38 caliber bullets were recovered from Avis's body. 3 of the 4 gunshot wounds were fatal. 1 bullet hit her thigh, another hit her stomach and exited through her glutes, another hit the left side of her chest, and the last one was to the back of her head, execution style. All of the bullets had been fired from very close proximity, suggesting that Avis was ambushed as soon as she got out of her car. A knife or another sharp-bladed object had been used to stab her several times in the head, as well as slash her throat. But these wounds seemed to have been inflicted post-mortem, after she was already dead, which is so brutal and cruel. It was confirmed that there were no signs of forced sexual activity, so it did seem like that part was staged. They deduced that the murder weapon was a 5-shot revolver, and sadly, it was confirmed that Avis was in her 2nd trimester of her pregnancy. Since her unborn child died as a result of Avis being killed, his death was ruled a homicide, like hers. The theory was that the killer was waiting inside the house for Avis to pull up. They could hear the garage door open, and could hear her pulling her car in, and then closing the garage door behind her. As soon as she got out of her vehicle, the killer ambushed her, most likely shooting her in the leg first to stop her in her tracks, and then they proceeded to fire the other 4 shots. 1 missed and went through the garage door. The 3 others made contact and killed Avis. The rest was overkill and very personal. All of it seemed impersonal. Avis was lying on that cold concrete ground, dying all alone for 3 hours until Keyon alerted the police that she was dead. It's so heartbreaking to think about what she must have thought in those final moments. Some say that head wounds like hers would have killed a person right away, but we will never know. We can only hope that she did not suffer too long. I told you that a tip came in while an attorney in the Jackson area called in on December 5th to say that he had information about a gun. He actually had it in his possession, and it matched the description of the one that could have been used in Avis's case. He also had a witness who could tie the gun back to the person who they believed committed the crime. Investigators contacted this witness and brought him in for an interview. His name is Patrick Nash. He's Carla Hughes' first cousin. You're hearing her name again. Their mothers are sisters. He and his dad, Carla's uncle James, lived in Jackson. He said that on November 26th, 3 days before the shooting, Carla came to Patrick's house and asked him to borrow some weapons to protect herself. She lived in a really rough neighborhood, and her apartment had already been broken into several times since August. Her dad actually had to drive up from Greenville and fix the lock on her door at one point. So Carla told Patrick that she did not feel safe and that it would make her feel better if she was able to defend herself if something like that happened again. At first, Patrick suggested that she get a can of mace, but Carla said that would not be enough and asked him if he had any extra guns that she could hold on to until she moved out of there. For starters, Patrick gave her a 4-inch folding hunting knife and then went to look for a gun that he could loan his cousin. He gave Carla a Rossi .38 caliber revolver that held 5 bullets. He showed her how to use the gun, loaded it with 5 bullets, and sent her on her way. He didn't think much of it at the time, but on the evening of December 1st, right after Carla got out of the interview with Detective Dillard, she went back to Patrick's house and returned the revolver. It was freshly cleaned, and the bullets were no longer inside. When Patrick asked Carla where they were, she said she had used them for target practice. Remember that exactly 5 bullets were fired at the crime scene, and he never saw that knife again. Patrick already knew Avis had died because Carla told him on the night of Avis's murder. She called him and let him know, so all the details lined up. Patrick and James honestly didn't know what to do. They both loved Carla and found her to be a really compassionate and peaceful person. They just didn't think she was capable of this violence, capable of murder. Did she even know that the bullets had been used? Had she cleaned the gun, or had someone else used it and not told her? They didn't know, but what they did know was that they needed to come forward together. Patrick and James went to a lawyer with the gun, and the lawyer went to the police. The police were so grateful that they'd come forward. Patrick and James were stand-up citizens. They did the right thing by giving the police this information. This is a sign for anyone out there who has ever seen anything sketchy. Tips really matter. They can change the course of an entire investigation. If you see something, say something, please, even if it's family. Because remember, someone else's loved one has been taken away, and you'd want someone to do the same for you. Investigators sent the revolver to a ballistics company, and they conducted some test fires. They determined that yes, the bullets used in the revolver were a positive match for the bullets used to kill Avis. Since Carla was in possession of that gun on November 29th, it was confirmed that she was somehow involved in this crime and was actively working to cover it up. She lied to detectives not once but twice. First, she told them that she was just friends with Keyon, and then she said that she didn't have access to a weapon. That's not a good look when you're a suspect. On the morning of December 6th, Avis and her unborn son Ken's funeral was held at Locust Grove Church. It was a day filled with grief and sorrow. The funeral occurred on the same day that Avis was supposed to receive her master's degree. It was a bitter irony that she couldn't be there to celebrate her academic achievement. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to pay their respects and to say goodbye to a woman who touched so many lives. As everyone was gathering around, reminiscing about Avis's life and her impact, Keyon walked in. You could feel the tension. Avis's family had just recently found out about his affair with Carla Hughes, and emotions were running high. But the police were on site in case anything were to happen. Fred and Deborah were outraged that Keyon would even show his face at that funeral. Fred thought for sure that he was responsible for Avis's death. They remembered back to Thanksgiving weekend when Keyon was spending all that time pacing around and talking on the phone. They wondered if this had anything to do with Avis's death. LaTonya disagreed with her dad. There was something about her sister's death that seemed so brutal and calculated that she thought there was something more to it. Either way, they felt that Keyon had some role in Avis's murder, and the family was furious that he had the audacity to show up and not even cry. They saw him pretending to be upset, but Fred and Deborah described what he was doing as just hollering. There weren't any tears coming out of his eyes, it was just noise. The devil's advocate would say that everyone grieves in their own way, but the Banks family was not having it. LaTonya told Keyon she would beat his ass. Her husband had to literally hold her back from attacking him. That's when a scuffle began, and a few men started to turn on Keyon. The police had to intervene and escort him to his car, with some sort of cloth or coat shielding his face from view. He never saw the Banks family again after that. That would be tough. On one hand, he's your loved one's fiancé and their unborn child, but on the other hand, he's a suspect, so I don't know what I would do. But I think I would lean more towards not wanting him there. Even if he merely cheated on my family member while they were pregnant with his child, that would be enough for me, probably not to want to see him again because of his disrespect. Avis definitely didn't deserve that level of disrespect and drama at her funeral. And I wish I didn't have to be sitting here right now telling you the story of her murder, as well as all of the deeper secrets I'm about to uncover. After speaking with Patrick Nash, Carla Hughes was called in for another interview, and this time she brought a lawyer. The man she brought in was Johnny Walls, a well-known state senator who knew the Hughes family very well from back in Greenville. He had known Carla Hughes since she was just a little girl. Johnny met Carla when she was in high school and held her in very high regard. Remember that Carla was very accomplished. I told you about all of her honors when she was growing up. So he was shocked that she would be involved in a crime of this magnitude. There weren't many questions she was willing to answer, but at one point, when the detective stepped out of the room, she and her lawyer friend kept talking. They should have known better, since most of us know that all police stations are recording audio and sometimes video in their interview rooms. There they sat, whispering to one another, and her lawyer said something to the effect of, "They're waiting for you to give them information about Keyon and his involvement in all this. If you point the finger at him, it'll take the pressure off of you." But she just responded that she couldn't do that because she didn't know what happened. Well, the Rin PD charged Carla with accessory to murder after the fact, hoping that she would come clean and tell them what she knew about the man it seemed like she was covering for. But she remained silent. Considering Carla had always been so well-liked and successful in her life, her arrest came as a huge shock to her community. Everyone thought she was well-grounded and genuinely nice. She was never even agitated or raised her voice. She was stubborn sometimes, but many of us can be. She was always the type to take the high road. Carla lived by the philosophy her mother taught her, which was, God says to turn the other cheek. So all this was hard for people to wrap their minds around. Carla being charged with accessory to murder. It's possible. In all the videos I've done, I've realized anyone is capable of spiraling down into the depths of depravity. It's what I talk about in my Dark Livity podcast. Even those we least expect, model students, best friends, people without any mental health concerns or criminal histories, can become involved in violence. Keyon didn't have a criminal history either, but at least one of them had stooped to this level of excessive, monstrous violence, and investigators needed to figure out who. Once the police served Carla the papers charging her with accessory to murder, the detectives once again left the room, and she and her lawyer discussed the situation among themselves. Her lawyer told Carla that she shouldn't be too concerned. The police were certain Keyon was the culprit. They just needed an accusation, and Carla would be the best person to blame Keyon. He told her that the reason she was being charged was because Patrick had reported under oath that Carla returned the gun to him empty and that she had been crying when she gave it back to him. Carla said she wasn't crying and that she didn't know who killed Avis because she wasn't there to witness it. She stood firm. She would not accuse Keyon of any crime. Johnny wanted to know why Carla was trying to protect Keyon. To the police and everyone else trying to understand this crime, it didn't make sense. Why wouldn't she save herself? There was only speculation. They thought Carla might be in love with Keyon, and that's why she refused to point the finger. If Carla truly didn't know what happened and it was someone else who had killed Avis, was she just being honest and trying to stay true to herself? She certainly wasn't going to plead guilty, not when police had so little evidence against her. Together, Carla and Johnny agreed that she would plead not guilty and remain silent. Because she did remain silent, it reinforced her charge. She was taken to the Madison County Detention Center and resigned from her job at Chastain Middle School. In the following days, news outlets reporting on the crime kept asking Lieutenant Neal why Carla was charged, but he didn't reveal any information to the press. Instead, he continued to reach out to Keyon, whose car was now missing. He had never gone back to school or told anyone if he might come back. The kids at the school were so confused about what happened to their favorite language arts and science teacher. It felt like a big hole in their community. The flood of newspaper articles kept saying the same thing. The police couldn't comment on Avis's case until Keyon was interviewed. Deborah and Fred were relieved that someone was being charged in the crime. Deborah told the Clarion Ledger on December 7th that she had actually met Carla before. It's true she'd been to one of Avis's housewarming parties. Carla had visited as Keyon's friend. There were reports that Avis and Carla knew one another, and since Avis and Keyon had been living in their house long before Carla started teaching at Chastain, the timeline was a little bit off. But this showed me just how much Avis's case was affecting her family. Deborah was horrified and upset to learn that she might have met the person who killed her daughter, especially knowing that this crime could have been prevented if Carla would have just run off with Keyon and left Avis alone. Anything would have been better than this. On Friday, December 8th, Lieutenant Neal continued his investigation, now directing his efforts to figure out if Carla committed this crime. He applied for a search warrant on the 6th, and you know those things take a few days to go through, but finally it was ready. Detective Dillard actually recorded a walkthrough video of Carla's apartment, hoping to find a few different things: the missing bullet shells, a missing folding knife, blood-stained clothing, shoes that matched the shoe print on the door, gloves, or any written communication between Carla and Keyon that would reveal more about their relationship. The search found 3 things. First, they found a photograph of Keyon propped up on Carla's nightstand among a bunch of other photos that she had of him. This further established the affair between the two of them. Second, a handwritten poem addressed to Carla and signed with the initials KP, which we know as Keyon Pittman's initials. Third, as Carla's closet was being searched, they found hundreds of shoes still in their boxes. You can see them right here, but one pair stood out: a size 10 women's black tread-safe tennis shoe. These were non-slip shoes that someone would usually wear to work if they were like waiting tables. Police sent the shoes to the Mississippi Crime Laboratory, and the tread pattern, you could even look at it, was identical to the shoe print found on Avis's back door. And here's what's so interesting. A size 10 in women's is a size 8 in men's. So these shoes were the exact same size they were looking for all along. They were quickly sent to the lab for DNA testing. The initial test detected no DNA on the shoes. However, the detectives decided to send them to a second lab for a more in-depth analysis. There, a technician carefully examined them under a microscope and was astonished to find several microscopic bloodstains on that shoe. The technician conducted DNA testing on those dried blood stains, and the results were conclusive. The blood found on the shoe was an exact match for Avis Banks. This evidence indicated that Carla came into contact with Avis at some time during her murder, and the charges against Carla were upgraded to 2 counts of capital murder. In Mississippi, killing a pregnant woman is the equivalent of killing 2 people, and the consequences of capital murder are either life in prison or the death penalty. Carla's prison time started immediately after she was charged. She was held without bond at the detention center, and police finally revealed to the newspapers that she was charged because she was associated with both the murder weapon and the shoe print. That's pretty damning. Fred and Deborah did not attend Carla's initial hearing, but they said they were glad someone was being brought to justice. The matter of Keyon's innocence was yet to be determined. Police still needed to track this man down. As far as we know, Keyon was never officially fired from Chastain, but since he never promised to return, it counted as a resignation. On December 13th, he did drive to the police department to talk to Lieutenant Neal, but Keyon turned his car around as soon as he saw reporters. Antoine, his lawyer, said that Keyon would return to work in January once the media stopped intensely covering this case. He made an offer to the police that Keyon would answer all their questions in written form, like an email, but that wasn't going to cut it. There was so much nonverbal body language that could be analyzed through an in-person interview. It was crucial that police figure out how Keyon was involved, and they needed to interview him in person. They finally got their chance in January. He was a witness at Carla's preliminary trial, which was held on January 2nd, 2007. The courtroom was packed, and Keyon answered several questions about his affair with Carla. Interestingly enough, it didn't quite match up with Carla's interpretation of their relationship. This is gonna get good, so please don't leave now. Here's where it gets very interesting and equally disturbing, and I hope you're ready for this. Keyon was introduced to Carla when she began working at the middle school in August of 2006, and he said there was instant chemistry between the two of them. It began with innocent flirting, but it quickly turned into them passing notes to one another during school hours, with their students actually facilitating this. Keyon would write one note and then have a student drop it off to Carla, and vice versa. Very inappropriate. Carla was so similar to Avis. They were both intelligent, accomplished, beautiful women, but Carla was her opposite in some ways that Keyon was very attracted to. She was social and enjoyed partying, whereas Avis liked to stay at home and was more family-oriented. Carla was his fun girl, and she quickly began making it obvious that she was interested in Keyon, regardless of the fact that he had a fiancé at home who was pregnant with his baby. That's just pathetic. After only 3 weeks of knowing each other, she tells Keyon that she rides a motorcycle, which of course intrigued him. So she offered to go on a ride with him. They just needed to stop by her apartment close to school so she could change real fast. But instead of seeking the privacy of her bathroom or bedroom alone, no, Carla just takes her clothes off right in front of Keyon. He got the message loud and clear, and soon Carla was coming over to Keyon's bar and drinking all night, which eventually led them to go back to her place and have sex. This was only a few days after she got naked right in front of him. That was the other thing. Keyon said that Carla wouldn't say no to anything when it came to the bedroom. They began sleeping together 3 or 4 times a week, and Keyon described it as a sexual adventure. They weren't hiding their affair. When Carla came into his bar, Keyon would pay her special attention and even played with her feet at her table in front of other customers and coworkers. They were very brazen. All of this happening while Avis was pregnant. She was working all day, waiting for him to get back home from what she thought was him working hard to provide for their growing family. It disgusts me, and I hope this case is a big eye-opener. But many men don't watch these videos, so it's most likely only going to cause women to have more fear and anxiety, because I know that's what it did to me, sadly. But this isn't me just pointing fingers at men. Ladies, take note of how dangerous an affair can be. On Labor Day weekend in September, just a few weeks after they started sleeping together, Keyon boldly took a trip to Memphis with Carla. I don't know how he pulled that off, but while there, he confided in her that he was not always completely satisfied with his relationship with Avis. To what extent? I don't know. But he said he realized after all this that he may have led Carla on when he was just in his feelings. At the time, he didn't love Carla. It was merely sexual, according to him. But I think writing someone a poem is more emotional than just physical. Would you agree or not? Well, Carla became more and more possessive over Keyon as time went on. She began to imagine what it would be like if she were his wife, living in a nice house, having his baby, not Avis. Carla didn't hold back. She began pressuring Keyon to break things off with Avis, but he refused. Even when Carla told him that she was in love with him, now we're only hearing his side of things. We don't know what he actually told Carla, but she must have thought the pregnancy was a big reason that Keyon wouldn't leave. That may be why Carla announced to Keyon that she was pregnant with his baby. Shocked when he heard this, Keyon had no idea how he was going to deal with 2 pregnant women in his life at the same time. Carla was getting bolder as well. She wanted Keyon to get caught. There was one weekend when he and Avis took a trip to attend his cousin's wedding in Detroit, and when they got back to the airport in Mississippi, Carla was there waiting in her car, watching them. Keyon pretended that he did not see her, and thankfully Avis was not aware of her presence. But the next time he was with Carla, he confronted her about this, and Carla lied, saying her aunt was borrowing her car. But finally, she came clean and told him she just wanted to see who he was bringing on his trip to Detroit. Carla was well aware that she wasn't the only person Keyon was cheating with. Later in October, she said that her pregnancy test was not valid. It was a false positive. Her doctor said it had something to do with her birth control method that she was using, whatever that means. But I think it's clear that Carla wasn't being honest to begin with. Keyon was so happy to receive this news that she was not having his baby, and Carla became irate. How dare he be happy that she wasn't pregnant? So she threatened to drive over to Avis and tell her about their affair. She actually got in her car, started driving over there, and he was following behind her, calling her on the phone and begging her not to. He finally said if she pulled up to his house, he would call the police. Carla finally backed down. Despite all this, Keyon still thought the sex was worth all of this drama because he continued seeing Carla. He said it was like he was addicted, but insisted he wasn't making love to her. Well, maybe not in his mind, but it was clear that Carla wanted more. By the time Thanksgiving came around, Keyon and Avis made their way to Land's out in Houston. Remember, his phone kept ringing? Well, it was another woman, Carla, begging him to come spend the holidays with her. Oh, and by the way, Keyon had met Carla's friends and family, and when he did, she would introduce him as her future husband. Yeah, he didn't see that as a red flag. Carla kept interrupting dinner, and Keyon kept answering instead of ignoring her calls. Finally, Avis jokingly asked him, "Who's that your girlfriend that keeps calling?" He made light of it, saying it was a family issue. You'd think all of this was quite a hassle for Keyon, so much so that he would just stop seeing Carla. Plus, if it was just sex, then why was he doing so much for her and risking so much? The weekend after Thanksgiving, Avis and Keyon made a trip out to his mom's house to spend some time there. Well, guess who drives out there with a friend and gets a hotel nearby? Yeah, Carla. She was begging Keyon to come see her. He finally gave in to her demands and met her at a bar on Saturday night. I don't know how he was able to excuse his absence to Avis and his mother, but after a few drinks, Keyon told Carla he had to get back to his mom. This was supposed to be family time, and she was livid. She didn't like being second, so an argument started and continued into the next day over texts and calls. At this point, Carla told Keyon that something had to change. She insisted that Avis wasn't the right person for him and that they should just run away together. He agreed on one thing. Something did need to change. So he decided to go distant and stop returning her messages and calls because he'd had enough. Then, Keyon described the events of the evening that Avis was murdered. We already know all of that. Remember, he's on the stand saying all this at Carla's preliminary hearing. But when Carla's defense attorney, Johnny Walls, began questioning Keyon, he wasn't as forthcoming with his information. He refused to answer any questions. How frustrating is that? He took the stand, swore to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but remained silent. But I guess he has the right to protect himself. Because of Keyon's behavior, everyone in the room started to suspect he was hiding something. Johnny was understandably frustrated and ended his questioning by asking Keyon, "Have you had a chance to cry yet?" Everyone in the courtroom gasped, and a couple of people laughed. I mean, Keyon was not the easiest guy to like based on his string of affairs, but nobody expected Johnny to burn him like that in front of the whole courtroom. The judge ruled that he would appoint a grand jury for Carla's trial. There was a ton of evidence to uncover, some of which was still being processed, and the community was increasingly invested in the outcome of this case. There was a lot of outward support for Carla, and Deborah said it was really hard to stomach. There was all this rhetoric going around about how great Carla was when her daughter was the victim. All she was doing was hearing about how great of a person Carla was, how many beauty pageants she won, and how everyone thought this had to be a mistake. In February 2007, the state decided to pursue the death penalty against Carla due to the particularly cruel and heinous nature of Avis's murder. When a reporter for the Clarion Ledger interviewed Deborah Banks, Avis's mom, she was asked for her thoughts, and Deborah responded with, "Well, she brought this on herself." There were 3 whole years between Carla's preliminary hearing and the actual trial. It usually takes a year or 2, but this was a long time, and a lot happened in preparation for this trial. In 2007, Johnny filed 11 motions to relieve Carla of her potential sentence. He motioned to replace a few jury members, then demanded that the jury never hear the words "death penalty." He wanted the verdict and sentencing to be done in 2 separate rulings. He also argued that Carla should be completely relieved of her charges because she was discriminated against due to her race. This was not unheard of. Discrimination does happen, but the way Johnny went about this was in bad taste. The victim in this case was also a black female, so his argument that Carla should be released because she was already a victim as a descendant of slaves and had to endure that lifelong sentence, so to speak, that last motion didn't go through. But Johnny was definitely putting in the work and living up to his title as defense attorney, though he was also grasping at straws. In 2007, Keyon also stopped talking to his lawyer, and the police just gave up trying to get in touch with him. By December of that year, Keyon had straight up left Mississippi for Detroit, and he got married to another woman there. I'll say what you're probably thinking. That was fast. But grief is cyclical, and maybe a new wife was just the support system he needed. Side note, I did notice that he changed his name. He and his new wife, who is also a teacher and has a degree in elementary education but is also a master herbalist, opened up a botanical institute. It's an online school where they teach the proper implementation of botanical knowledge and herbal wisdom, according to their company's website, which is still in operation today. What a total life change. When the police find out that Keyon is married, they got a copy of his marriage certificate and gave it to Carla for Valentine's Day in 2008. That's juvenile on so many levels, but it was worth a shot to see if she would talk. Carla did not take the bait. She said she wasn't surprised he was married and continued to remain silent on whether Keyon was an accessory. A couple of reasons this trial took so long was that the region changed district attorneys, and then Lieutenant Neal needed surgery after he fell off a 15-foot ladder. But on Monday, October 5th, 2009, the long wait was over. Finally, the Banks family could get the answers they deserved. The Madison County courtroom in Jackson was filled with people, and Carla pled not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder and burglary with the intent to assault. Prosecutors Michael Guest and John Finger said that Carla wanted to be married to Keyon, so she killed Avis out of jealousy. The defense attorney Johnny Walls said Keyon had framed Carla, and he was the only person responsible for Avis and his unborn child's passing away. Keyon was the key witness. On Tuesday, he spoke for 4 hours, and I'm going to try to summarize everything for you, but trust me, there are a lot of gaps that he filled in. I'm going to make it quick. First, he said he was innocent. He called himself a fool for sleeping with Carla. He explained that he and Carla texted all the time, and though Avis never officially met her, they had seen each other at the airport and in passing. Avis knew they were friends, but not that they were hooking up. She trusted Keyon and never would have thought he was cheating. Keyon felt guilty that Avis went to work, came home, and devoted her life to their family, and that he put her at risk by running around with this other woman. He felt partially responsible for what happened. At least he could own up to his behaviors and recognize where he messed up. Then he described his affair with Carla. We've already heard most of it, but wow, just wow. Carla and Keyon had the audacity to have sex in Avis's house 3 different times when she was at work. So Carla had been in that house enough times to know the full layout, and that was important. They spent so much time together for a while that Keyon had a key to Carla's apartment, though he said he gave it back in mid-November. This would come in handy when it came to Carla's defense. Keyon said he was totally stringing Carla along. There was no emotional connection, but he did everything to make her feel special, and she wanted to spend time with him constantly. She kept his love notes in her bedroom and was in complete denial about him not wanting more. Keyon told some wild stories, but keep in mind this is Keyon trying to save himself from being implicated and sent to jail. He told the court that Carla was basically stalking him, even though he was the one who agreed to meet her all of those times, which was wild to me. On Sunday, November 26th, Keyon said he was talking to Carla on the phone while he was spending time with Fred and Deborah. It was during that disagreement that Carla said, "From this point on, some things are going to change." That was so ominous, and it was also the night that Carla retrieved that gun from Patrick. Keyon said that after his and Carla's disagreement, they didn't talk much for the rest of that week. He also said the last time he hooked up with her was mid-November. But what were they doing in Carla's hotel room the weekend before Avis's death? And why did they spend so much time together on that Wednesday night before he drove back home and found her dead? He was at her apartment, getting groceries, I'm doing air quotes, for almost an hour, so something does not add up. But Keyon broke down the timeline of events. He confirmed Carla's statement that he dropped off the groceries at her house, left around 5:15, went to basketball practice, and spent the entire time texting another woman, Bridget. Bridget was a mom of one of the kids he was coaching. She was at the gym the entire time that he was there, texting him from right across the room. Of course, Bridget didn't want anyone to know about their flirtationship, as I'm calling it, with Keyon, the coach. She was married, and the flirty text messages kept up the excitement of the affair. But later, Bridget testified that Keyon was at practice the whole time, and she was also one of the women he was having sex with even a few months after Avis died. To me, it feels a bit heartless, but it also means that Keyon had an alibi between 5:50 and 6 p.m. when the police believed that Avis was killed. Other parents came forward and testified to these facts as well. He was at practice when it started. When Keyon picked up his groceries from Carla's place, he said she was quiet, which was not normal. She was usually very energetic and talkative. He did admit that he stayed for about 40 minutes, and then he called Avis on his way home. But when she didn't respond, he freaked out, and once again, something doesn't add up. Keyon was saying that he had a feeling something was wrong, and that he knew this before he even opened the garage. It didn't really add up to me. He said that he actually left his car door open. You can see it right here, the car is still running, but the garage door was shut at that time when he pulled in. So how did he know something wasn't right before actually opening it? Maybe I'm a little confused with his statements, but what we did know was that when Keyon found Avis, he panicked. He said that's why he called Carla and another woman, who I'm assuming was Bridget, hoping that they would come over and support him through this trying time. He was in shock, and he said he wasn't having rational reactions under the circumstances. When Keyon was asked why he didn't immediately call 911, he again told the jury that he just didn't think the call would go through. He had purchased his phone outside the region, so he thought the phone would connect to the wrong police department. I don't know if this is just an excuse or if he really didn't know how 911 worked or how phones worked. What do you think? The defense asked Keyon about the tread-safe tennis shoes that Carla owned, and it turns out Carla had actually gifted these shoes to Keyon. They were non-slip shoes that were really good for bartending. However, when he wore them into the Mexican restaurant, Keyon said that they told him he wasn't allowed to wear those specific shoes, so he gave them back to her in mid-November. Why does everything happen in mid-November? It's like he gave the key back to her in mid-November, the shoes back to her in mid-November. It's weird. The defense was convinced that Keyon had used the key that Carla gave him to let himself into her apartment, borrow those shoes, wear them to the scene of the crime, and then put them back. Because why would Carla, if she did this, put bloody shoes back in her own closet? But, according to the police, Keyon was not wearing those tread-safe shoes that evening. He would not have had any time to do all that. When he was taken from the scene right to the police station, he was wearing lace-up Cole Haans. Keyon spent his entire testimony crying but without tears. Just like at Avis's funeral, Deborah told DeLine that she thought he just rubbed his eyes until they were red just before he took the stand, so it looked like he was more upset. And let's be real, everyone could see through Keyon's BS at this point. But was he really a murderer or involved? It was up to the jury to decide. Later that week, during the trial, the prosecution and the defense brought in cell phone experts. Keyon and Carla's cell phone devices had been all over the place that evening, and it seemed like the only way to find out who killed Avis was to figure out where they were between 5:50 and 6 p.m. A cell phone engineer testified for the defense that someone could start a call in one area, drive to the next, and commit a murder while the phone call was still going on. During that time, it would only register to the original cell tower where the call was started. This could create an alibi, and the perpetrator could get away with a crime, but you would need to be on the phone the entire time. From what it looks like, most of the calls Keyon and Carla made that evening were very short check-ins. They weren't on the phone for a long period. Another guy, an AT&T engineer, confirmed that Avis's last call to Keyon pinged at the Lake Harbor Drive cell phone tower, a tower with a 2.5-mile radius that included the Blackthorn subdivision where Avis and Keyon lived. So at 5:36, when Avis called Keyon about their dinner plans, she was even closer to home. The AT&T engineer also said that Keyon's calls came from Carla's place, then Chastain, then the grocery store, but he was never anywhere near his own home. That is until 8:41 and 8:56, when he made 2 calls that pinged off the Lake Harbor Drive tower, which did show that he got home around 8:30. Keyon called Carla at 5:37, right after he called Avis about dinner. Who knows what they talked about? Was it about him picking up his groceries, or was it something else? When Keyon made that call to her, and she ended that call, her phone showed that she was somewhere within 2 miles of Avis's home. Then, at 6:04, Carla made another outgoing call, and once again her phone pinged at the Lake Harbor Drive tower. At 6:07, she called someone else, and now she was out of range and on her way back home. One of these post-6 p.m. calls was made to Keyon while he was at practice. So what did they need to talk about? Did Carla tell him what she had done, or was she confirming it was finished? Both sides have their theories. Carla did have one friend that lived near the Lake Harbor Drive cell tower, but when questioned, that friend said that Carla had not come to visit on the 29th. Why was she near that particular tower then? Her gym was close to her home. It was now clear that Carla was the one who killed Avis in cold blood, and Keyon might have been an accessory based on the numerous calls over the course of that day. But there was no way to figure out what they said to each other over the phone. Carla remained silent. But one huge bombshell that was revealed, which I could not believe, was that Carla had a son. He was 2 years old at the time she moved to Jackson to take the job at Chain Middle School. But she left him behind to be cared for by her parents so she could concentrate on her new job. But that also meant she was free to do whatever she pleased with Keyon. But here's the shocking part. Back in 2004, Carla was supposed to get married to her fiancé, and she, too, just like Avis, was pregnant when they were supposed to exchange their vows. But just days before her wedding, her fiancé called it all off, leaving her to raise her son all alone as a single mother. All of her dreams were shattered. It was a very odd coincidence. If she had killed Avis, was this some type of subconscious revenge for her own life not turning out as she planned? Did she want to stop this other woman from getting what she couldn't have? I couldn't believe it when I heard it, but the defense tried to prove that Keyon was the killer. Johnny brought up the key that Keyon had borrowed from Carla, the gunpowder residue on his hands, and his intimate knowledge of what Carla's apartment looked like. But Keyon didn't know where Carla kept her cousin's gun. He didn't have the key anymore. Even Carla's extended family was convinced that she was the one who actually killed Avis. As much as they didn't want to believe it was true, Carla's Uncle James said that when she returned the gun to him and Patrick, he asked her if she had used the gun to kill anyone. She dropped her head and shrugged her shoulders. James wasn't sure what that meant. Carla either didn't know what happened, or she had killed Avis and just didn't want to admit it. Starting Monday, October 12th, the jury began their deliberations. They asked if Carla could testify, but she remained silent. After 8 hours of deliberation, Carla was found guilty. When the verdict was read, Deborah became very upset. She even fainted and needed to recover in a separate room. Linda, who is Carla's mother, went to her and prayed with her, and Fred and Carla prayed for one another. Both families were lost in this tragic crime. Both families were grieving. After 3 long years of seeking justice for Avis's murder, the Banks and the Hughes families were absolutely exhausted. After spending all this time together, they connected through such a horrible event. The two families had formed an acquaintanceship. They bonded by loss. They wanted the best for one another, and they wanted all of this to be over. Carla's sentencing was set for Wednesday, the 14th, and Carl pleaded for her life. Her son was now 5 years old, and if Carla was given the death penalty, her child would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. The jury agreed and gave Carla 2 sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole instead of death. Wow, that's a lot, and this case just seems to keep going, but I'm almost done. Johnny will forever be known as a defense lawyer who just doesn't quit. Carla appealed the verdict on 6 different counts for showing DNA evidence, for asking if she wanted to testify, etc. I'm not going to go into all of it because the reality is that all of the circumstantial evidence pointed to Carla. She borrowed the gun, she was at the scene of the crime, her shoes had blood on them. It was Carla, and the appeal was dismissed. She was transferred to the Central Mississippi Women's Correctional Facility, where she's going to spend the rest of her life. I guess we'll never know if Keyon had any role in Avis's murder. Sometimes cases are frustrating like that. I still have so many questions about this case, like what were Keyon and Carla saying to each other on the phone the 5+ times they called each other that night? Could it have just been a way for Carla to make it look like nothing nefarious was going on? I'm definitely not Keyon's biggest fan. I'm appalled by his behavior when it came to all the times he cheated on Avis that we know of. But if he was an accessory in Avis's murder, he's the one who's going to pay for it in guilt and shame for the rest of his life. And if Keyon truly had no idea what happened to his fiancé and his unborn child, then my heart goes out to him. Losing someone you love when you have all these plans and your whole life ahead of you is extremely devastating and hard to bounce back from. From what I know and have learned about Avis, she was an absolutely wonderful woman, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to continue her legacy by talking about her today. Her passion for affordable daycare, her persistent kindness and generosity, and her commitment to her family. Fred said he pities Keyon Pittman, saying that once he had a perfect life with Avis and he threw it all away, which resulted in Avis's death. Avis's family is haunted by a constant wonder about what life would have been like for her and her unborn son if they hadn't been brutally murdered. She had so much potential to make a difference in this world. I'll leave you with Deborah and Fred's words after the sentencing. Deborah said that no matter what came out of this case, she knows that Avis will haunt Keyon and Carla every night before they go to sleep. Fred said that now Avis's murderers are behind bars and she can finally rest in peace. Spring break, it's the time of year when the rules of our everyday routines don't matter, when we can leave behind the stresses of work and school and embrace the freedom of the moment. It's a time for adventure and excitement, for spontaneous road trips and lazy afternoons basking in the sun. That's exactly what Christine Lazaro was looking forward to on her spring break. What she didn't expect was that it would be her last adventure and she wouldn't be coming home alive. Let's get into Christine Lazaro. She was born on August 8, 1972 in Rochester, New York, to her mother Kathleen and her father Frank. She was the middle child of 3 children. She had an older brother, Frank III, named after his dad and grandpa. He was 2 years older than Christine, and she had a little sister, Daniel Lynn, who came 9 years later in 1981. Around 1984, the family moved to a quaint suburb of the city of Rochester called Irondequoit. The population was about 50,000 at the time. It's known to have big city culture but small city charm, and its name means where the land and the water meet. It does border Lake Ontario just south of Toronto and Ottawa, Canada. Living in this part of New York, the summers are warm, but the winters are freezing, snowy, and windy, and it's partly cloudy all year long. Over the course of the year, the temperatures can vary from 18 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's only warm from about June to August. Then it's back to living in the cold. The snowy season there lasts for 5 months. When Christine, who by the way went by Chrissy, was just a kid, her parents actually split up. They got a divorce. It was hard on her and her family, but a thing about Chrissy is she was always looking on the bright side. She made the best of every situation, and she had always been a daddy's girl, especially after the divorce. Her dad would say that Chrissy was sugar and spice and everything nice, but of course, she was wearing jeans and a baseball cap. He was so proud of his little girl. Despite things not working out with her mom, Frank truly believed he had done everything right with Chrissy, and she was turning into an amazing young lady. He even wrote a poem about Chrissy as she was growing up, and this is what it said. Somewhere between a girl and a woman, this gift of God stands. She's a rose, a ray of sunshine, joy and laughter wrapped in lace or jeans, a treasure to hold, yet one to share. Her dad also said that she had an excitement for life that was contagious. It must have been true because she attracted a lot of people her way. Chrissy was very popular among all types of groups of people growing up. She was very fun, and you'd know when she came into a room, mostly because of her looks first. She looked like she could be a model. She had long, wavy brown hair, a big smile, high cheekbones, and green eyes. But it was Chrissy's personality that made her even more beautiful. She was just fun. She had a goofy, silly side. You can tell in this photo, she's all dolled up with friends but making a funny face at the camera. Speaking of being dolled up, Chrissy had dreams of becoming a fashion designer. She was very stylish. She loved doing her hair, her makeup, picking out the perfect outfit, and her eye for detail and unique style made her stand out. She always wanted to make sure that everything was just right. She took pride in her appearance, and her dad encouraged her to go after what she was passionate about. So when it came time to choose a college, Chrissy's choice was to study fashion design at the local Monroe Community College, which was only 15 minutes away from where she lived. By 1993, she was 20 years old. She was going to school, and she was working part-time as a waitress at Galveston's Restaurant and Bar on East Ridge Road. It's right here, 2 minutes away from her house. Very convenient. It had opened in the fall, and Chrissy had been working there for 6 months since its grand opening. Chrissy was perfect for this job. She was very bubbly. She would jump from table to table, enthusiastically welcoming guests as they sat down and trying to make friends with each and every one. Tim Piccolo was her assistant manager at the time, and he'd say that the group of about 20 of them, the employees, they all loved Chrissy. They were like a big family, and she was a hard worker. She had a good reason to be. She was saving up to move into her own apartment, but she didn't plan to be alone. It was going to be a place that she would share with her very best friends, the 3 girls who knew Chrissy the best: Rita Filipponi, Lauren Marotti, and Kelly Pagoni. They were inseparable for many years. They did everything together. If you saw one of them, you saw all of them, because they would go everywhere as a group. That's another thing Christine took pride in, being a good friend, a loyal friend, somebody you could always count on. For her, friends meant the world. By early 1993, Chrissy had just started dating a guy named Carl Jeffries. He played minor league baseball, and she was pretty smitten. Her dad approved as well. He liked the way Carl was very gentlemanlike. He would open the doors for his daughter, and he was very well-mannered, and Frank really liked that about him. Not many guys still do that, by the way. She enjoyed Carl's company, but they were just starting their romance. It wasn't serious just yet, especially since Carl wasn't around that much. He was very busy with his baseball career and spent most of his time in South Carolina practicing with his team, so they didn't really get to see much of each other. But when they both had spare time, they enjoyed spending it together. And that was okay because Chrissy was very busy herself, juggling college, work, and of course hanging out with the girls. They were planning a really fun trip to Florida for spring break. Their sunny destination, Daytona Beach, Florida. It's the perfect place to enjoy fun in the sun and so much more. Chrissy loved the beach, and she didn't get to go very often because, like I said, the closest one was probably about 300 miles away. So all she did was talk about this trip. She couldn't wait to get her toes in the sand and bake in the sun. She liked getting a nice bronze suntan, and Daytona is like paradise for someone living in colder weather. Snowbirds flock to the Sunshine State to escape the frigid weather up north. It's true that Florida beaches are the perfect location to spend your time looking for that tropical vacation experience, but with so many other, more popular destinations like Miami or Fort Lauderdale, I wondered, how did this small coastal town, that's not even in the middle of the Panhandle, become so popular? Leave it to MTV, of course. In 1986, MTV made its first trip to Daytona Beach with the debut of their new show called MTV Spring Break. It launched at the Plaza Hotel in Daytona Beach. This was a live show that MTV used to broadcast for 8 hours a day during spring break. It featured live music performances by famous bands and musicians, plus all the other spring break-related antics, bikini-clad women, alcohol, and lots of hot-looking co-eds. The president of MTV at that time, Doug Herzog, said this about being at spring break. He said, "Spring break is a youth culture event, and we wanted to be part of it for that reason. It makes good sense for us to come down and go live from the center of it because obviously, the people that are there are the kinds of people who watch MTV." And it's true, they were definitely hitting their demographic. By the 1980s, other coastal cities in Florida, like Fort Lauderdale, started to discourage college students from spending their spring and summer breaks on their beaches. It brought a lot of destruction, crime, and chaos to the beautiful cities, while the mayor of Daytona at the time, Larry Kelly, saw this as an opportunity to have his town on the map and invite tourists to his beach instead. It was all about business, but sometimes seeing green can blur your vision to the dangers and downsides of such an open invitation. Daytona actually started to market itself as the destination for spring break for tourists back in 1989. It was a huge moneymaker. A typical spring break in Daytona brought in $160 million back then, in a mere 3-month period, and an estimated 400,000 spring break vacationers, mostly college-aged individuals, who came there to run wild. And I can tell you this, the locals were not fans of this at all. In 1993, the biggest stars at the time were performing on MTV's Spring Break show. Joey Lawrence, I remember him, was the host, and some of the performers were Warren G. on his regular tour, Stone Temple Pilots, Eminem, Exhibit, and Dr. Dre, just to name a few. Of course, this was a major event. Just look at this picture. This is a bird's eye view of one of those performances in what they called the band shell. It kind of looks like a castle, and look at all of those people. However, Chrissy and her friends weren't going to Daytona for MTV, they just wanted everything else that came with the spring break capital that MTV had put on the map. Chrissy's trip wasn't until April, which was about a month after MTV was going to be there. It wasn't just the core group of girls making their way 1,000 miles from New York to Daytona, it was a group of 17 of them, guys and girls. The plan? Driving separate vehicles as somewhat of a caravan and getting a bunch of hotel rooms at a really cool hotel that's close to the beach and has everything. They picked the Howard Johnson Hotel on Atlantic Boulevard. It's right on the beach, just steps away from the ocean. Just look at these views. It makes me miss Florida. It's called the Plaza Resort and Spa now, but it's close to everything. Lots of bars, restaurants, clubs, music venues, and of course, lots of other spring breakers there for the exact same reasons. The road it's on, A1A, is lined with hotels and gift shops catering to out-of-towners, and it was the perfect choice for Chrissy's group. So, what did Frank think of this? His 20-year-old daughter taking a trip so far away from home? Well, he trusted Chrissy. Even though he said she could be impetuous at times, like most young adults are, she was also responsible and firmly grounded. Just 5 weeks prior to the trip, her father was proudly sharing the fact that he was so overjoyed that Chrissy had accepted Christ into her life. Besides that, they were going as a group. What could happen to a group of them? It was as though a piece of home was coming with Chrissy. They'd have one another. They'd be safe. On Friday, April 9th, 1993, the group of 17 Rochester guys and gals arrived at the beautiful Daytona Beach, Florida beaches to spend the next week having the time of their lives. Chrissy and the girls checked into their room on the 13th floor, and I'm sure there was an amazing view. Then they made their way down to A1A to get acquainted with the place they'd call home for the next several days. By the next day, Saturday, they were ready for their first full beach day and party night. They didn't really want to go out the night before because they wanted to be well rested and ready to dance all night long at the most popular nightclub in Daytona, Razzles, at 611 Seabreeze Boulevard. They saved their energy for Saturday night, which was also one of the busiest and best nights to go there. It's still a super popular venue today. Their website says Razzles is Daytona Beach's hottest nightclub and has been electrifying Daytona Beach for over 3 decades. There's even a dedicated spring break tab on the website where you can click to see what to expect when visiting Razzles, which they say is the spring break headquarters for over 35 years. It definitely looks like a party to me. It even advertises free drinks until 10 p.m. This place is packed most nights, where you're literally crammed in shoulder to shoulder. Their Facebook page as of February 22nd of this year was looking for security guards for this upcoming spring break season, so it's still jamming. The place is huge too. It's over 15,000 square feet. There are a number of different rooms, tables, booths, lounges, VIP sections, bars, and dance floors to choose from. The best part? It was only a 2-minute walk from their hotel, right around the corner, which made it super convenient, especially after drinking all night at Razzles. You can be 18 to enter, but you must be 21 to consume alcohol. Chrissy was only 20, but she brought a fake ID with her from New York so that she could bypass the restrictions. Back in those days, it was really easy to get your hands on a fake ID. Not only that, but they look completely different than the driver's licenses today. After spending all afternoon at the beach, the girls headed up to their room. They showered, did their hair and makeup, got dressed, and then headed out in their group to Razzles around 9 p.m. As soon as the doors opened, they got a table, ordered their drinks, and started dancing the night away. There's a lot to see and experience in a big nightclub like this. Lots of new people, loud music. Though they did come as a group together, they weren't glued to one another all night. Last call was announced, and the group met back up at the table. That's when they noticed that Chrissy wasn't there. Her friend, Rita, jumped into action immediately. During the night, the girls had been separated a number of times, but each time they made their way back together, so Rita just figured that Chrissy was somewhere in the crowd. She went looking around, asking friends if they had seen her, and one of their friends from the group said they remembered seeing her around midnight, talking to a guy and leaving with him out the front door. Rita and the girls did remember seeing Chrissy walk off a couple of times, but figured, you know what, she's going to be back. Of course, when you're busy having fun, time kind of slips away, and you don't always keep track of your adult friends' whereabouts. As a matter of fact, none of them were even concerned about Chrissy leaving. In their minds, she was living it up, having a good time, and maybe continuing the fun elsewhere. No big deal. So they made the 2-minute walk back to their hotel, figuring she would surely show up soon. At some point, the girls drifted off to sleep, and by the next day, Easter morning, on Sunday, April 11th, Chrissy still wasn't back. They didn't have cell phones back then, so they couldn't reach out by text or call her. There was no social media or Find My Device apps. All you could do was wait. So that's what they did. They were going to wait until Chrissy made her way back to the room. The girls asked some of their other Rochester friends if Chrissy had crashed with them in their hotel rooms, but she had not. They knew their friend, and they figured, you know what? She's probably having a little too much fun with the guy she met the night before. If something was wrong, they figured Chrissy would have called the hotel by now. They were a little surprised that Chrissy would choose a guy she didn't know over spending her vacation with her best friends. But they figured, what could they do, right? It was her choice. They weren't going to wait around and let the sun go down without getting out there on the beach and enjoying every minute of it. So, they left the room and headed out to the sand, assuming they'd see Chrissy anytime now, prancing down the shoreline with a story to tell them about last night. They still really were not that concerned at all, but they should have been. What Chrissy's best friends didn't know was that earlier that same morning, around 7:06 a.m., 30 miles southwest, in a sleepy bedroom community called DeBerry. I've heard that phrase before, but I never knew what it meant. A bedroom town refers to a small town tucked away from the city. It's a place where people move for cheaper rent, but it's close enough to commute into town for work. They live there basically just to sleep, and they spend most of their time elsewhere. Makes sense. I'd never heard of this town before either. It's located in Volusia County, about 45 minutes inland from the hotel where the girls were staying, and this area is definitely like night and day compared to Daytona Beach. Much more residential, rural in nature, spread out with way less going on. That Easter morning, a resident was on his way to work when he saw a flash of something white in the grass along a very busy road called Turkston Drive. It was out of place enough for him to stop and take a closer look, so he did. From his vantage point, he thought he could see a woman lying on the ground. He raced to the nearest convenience store to call 911. Officers made their way out to the road just outside a wooded residential neighborhood, and sure enough, they saw something that appeared to be a deceased human body. A few minutes later, Officer Greg Arthur, a crime scene investigator from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, got a phone call. They told him to go out to the scene. It was the supervisor of the major case unit that handles homicides in that area. Officer Arthur had been to many crime scenes. He had seen his fair share of very gruesome murders, but he had to compose himself when he arrived on the scene in DeBerry that holiday morning in 1993. Seeing her just lying there, curled up on her side, the strikingly beautiful woman, there was just something about it, like a sleeping beauty frozen in that moment, lifeless, yet with the air of potential she could have had in life, had she had the chance to live it. The officer was overcome with emotion. This was someone's child. He had so many questions, but he had to pull it together so that he could find the answers. The first thing he noticed was the blood. It contrasted against the white baseball jersey that she was wearing. She had it on, in this picture, with a pair of shorts taken the night before. Hours earlier, she was smiling and laughing with friends, and now it was soaked with her blood. It was pooling underneath her head. She still had her purse in her hand. What was she doing on this road? And who would have wanted to harm her? It was clear that she had been shot, and it appeared the wounds were on her head, but there were no other distinctive marks on her body. Could she have been walking here at night and been ambushed by someone? There was a very noticeable and fresh tire track right next to her body in the grass, so Officer Arthur used a cement-like substance to make an impression of this track. While the coroner arrived to transport the woman's remains to the medical examiner's office, they also recovered a spent shell casing, which was located around 4 feet away from where she had been lying. Since her purse was collected at the scene, they were able to look inside and get their first lead, a clue about her identity. But it wasn't crystal clear who she was because they found 2 New York State identification cards, one with information about a 26-year-old woman, and the other for a woman named Christine Lazaro, who was only 20. Now Officer Arthur thinks he knows who their victim is, the young girl, the 20-year-old in town for spring break. It doesn't take long for him to match her face to the younger woman's ID, and it makes sense. She would have wanted to have this fake ID so she could drink, especially because she was on this vacation from out of state. It's not uncommon at all. Plus, there was a big clue on the top of her hands, stamps from a nightclub. But she's so far from anywhere with a happening nightlife, so it's a mystery how she ended up this far inland. The officer knows she was most likely staying in Daytona. Now he has the dreadful task of notifying next of kin about the devastating reality that their loved one is dead. Frank was the first one to get that call. It was unbelievable to him. He kept saying, "No, no, no." That's all he could get out of his mouth. There wasn't anything else to say. It was going to take him a while to come to terms with what the officer was telling him, and they still did not have much information to provide. However, Frank was able to give them some information. He confirmed what Arthur had suspected. Chrissy was on a trip to Daytona Beach with her friends. He gave the officer the name and location of the hotel they were staying at. Chrissy's brother didn't get the chance to hear about his sister's death from a loved one. He saw it on the news. He said he would never forget seeing the EMTs loading a body bag into an ambulance, and that had to be extremely devastating. I cannot begin to imagine the pain of someone you love dying tragically, but to find out about it on TV like that, I can't help but feel so sorry for him. Meanwhile, back in Daytona, it was close to 5 p.m. when the trio made their way back to the hotel room from spending the day at the beach. They had to be back to get ready for dinner reservations that they had made before the trip. They had planned a nice Easter dinner at a fancy restaurant. But where is Chrissy at this point? The girls start to talk about how they're feeling in regards to the fact that they feel like Chrissy has just abandoned them and all their plans on this planned vacation. It was a holiday, and they were all looking forward to this night. Chrissy had helped pick out the restaurant, planned the event, and she even set out a special dress. It was hanging in the closet. So what's going on? What could be more important than this plan with her closest friends? They just didn't understand it, and it started to annoy them. They were just trying to make sense of it all. I mean, they weren't thinking that their best friend was dead, that's for sure. They thought that she had opted to spend time with someone else. Detective Jody Palermo was assigned as the lead detective on the case. He didn't understand what a spring breaker in Daytona would be doing in DeBerry, nearly an hour away from the beaches, and why she was just left there, not even covered up. It was as though she was dumped out of the side of a car door and just left there, thrown away like trash, and that was heartbreaking. What could she have done to make someone do this to her? Well, the only lead he has is the information given to them by Chrissy's father, so they made their way to the Howard Johnson's hotel, looking for her friends. Time is not on their side. Those first 24 to 48 hours are crucial, and it had already been 16 hours by the time they set out to find her friends. Kelly, Lauren, and Rita had made it to dinner, but there was just this eerie feeling around them. Rita had this wave of fear come over her at one point. She couldn't just sit there anymore enjoying this night without Chrissy. She turned to the other two girls and said, "This is serious. Something isn't right. Something's wrong. We gotta go." And they left to go back to their hotel. That gut feeling was right. When they got to their door, they saw a business card in their hotel room door. It was from Detective Palermo. At this point, they felt a little relieved, but then it turned to concern, like, what did Chrissy get herself into now? The girls were thinking she got arrested, maybe for having a fake ID or something worse. They didn't have much time to put it together though, because just as they stepped inside, the investigators were back at their hotel room door. Without hesitation, one of the investigators pulled them together and said, "Girls, there's no easy way to say this. Christine is dead." That's unbelievable. It was so difficult for them to hear this. That is not what they were expecting. All three of them just stood there, speechless. They were in shock. Their minds went completely blank. They didn't know what was going on. Rita actually thought the detective might have been speaking a different language. It sounded foreign to her because it wasn't making sense. But when she looked towards Kelly and Lauren, she knew and just broke down. All three of them broke down, hysterically crying. There were so many emotions and thoughts racing through their heads. Shock, guilt, sadness, and then the realization that they'd never see Chrissy again. They'd never hear her laugh or ask for her style advice. They were so young and alone, far from home, and now knowing their best friend was never going back home with them, it was a lot for them to take in. But there was no time to grieve in that moment, because detectives needed the girls to pull themselves together to help them understand what happened to their friend. The girls explained the last time they saw Chrissy. It was the night before at Razzles. They didn't see her leave, but friends of theirs said that she left the club with a dark-skinned male. He could have been Hispanic or African American, but he wasn't someone from their group. However, they did say this: Carl, the guy Chrissy had been seeing, matched that description. He was African American, but he was supposed to be in North Carolina. Still, it was only a 6-hour drive, so could he have surprised her and come to Daytona? By 7 p.m., the autopsy report had come back. The manner of death was homicide, and the cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds to the head. There were no signs of forced intercourse or any other physical harm to Chrissy's body. No defensive wounds, nothing. However, the medical examiner did find something on Chrissy's body, a clue left behind. Remember the stamp I mentioned on her hand from Razzles? The medical examiner could still see the R on one of her hands. But on the other hand, there was another stamp, one that her friends didn't have. It wasn't from Razzles. It was smudged, but he was able to make out 3 numbers. 701. That's the name of another hot spot in Daytona Beach, 701 South, a nightclub inside the Texan Hotel on Atlantic Avenue. Present day, the hotel is called the Harbor Beach Resort. It's about a 6-minute drive from Razzles, or about a 29-minute walk. So now investigators know Chrissy wasn't just at Razzles that night, which means the guy she left with might not have been the last person to see her alive. She could have met up with a lot of people. This case is becoming very confusing because there doesn't seem to be a motive. It's hard to imagine why someone would want Chrissy dead. They do have somewhat of a description to go off of, so now they can canvass the area where the body was found, plus the 2 nightclubs, hoping that someone saw or heard something the night before. Maybe someone would recognize Chrissy and remember who she was with, or if anything was out of the ordinary, if there was anything suspicious or wrong with her or anyone she was with. Then they get a lead. One of the servers at Razzles says she 100% remembers Chrissy. She even told detectives what Chrissy was wearing that night. "Oh, I remember her. She was wearing a white baseball jersey, had long dark wavy hair, and shorts on. She was with a black guy. They were sitting right at my bar together right here, and he was wearing a dark blue shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap." The server said they were having a very good time, very close. They looked like a couple. The guy was very polite, buying her drinks. Everything looked normal. Wow, okay, so this really did sound like it could be Carl. Maybe he came to surprise her after all. So they get the credit card receipt from the server, and when they look, they see the guy signing with the initials BC. That's definitely not Carl's initials. The server pulls up even more receipts, and they see that the full name is Brent Cole. So they contact the credit card company, pull up all of Brent's information, and find out he's a college student from Minnesota. They figure this guy was probably vacationing in Daytona, just like so many other students that week. Now they need to track him down ASAP, because this could be Chrissy's killer. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood where Chrissy's body was found, a resident said she remembered hearing a bang around 4:30 in the morning, followed by the sound of a vehicle racing away. She returned from Easter Sunday service later that afternoon, and that's when she saw the crime scene tape. She connected it to the gunshots from earlier that morning. But another resident said gunshots were super common in the early morning. It's a rural area, and hunters are out there shooting vermin. It wasn't much to go on. They were just trying to create a timeline, tentatively saying that Chrissy could have been murdered around 4 a.m. By the next day, Rita, Lauren, and Kelly had decided to take the 1,000-mile trip back home, ending their spring break vacation early. They couldn't cope with Chrissy's death all the way in Florida, far from their loved ones. Of course, their families were worried about them. They felt so guilty about not being there to protect their friend. They worried about Chrissy's family and the pain that they were going through. They just had to get back in town. It was equally as hard to leave, though, because this was the last place that they spent time with Chrissy, and they knew she would never be going back home. Not alive, anyway. Frank definitely wasn't taking a while. I don't know him personally, of course not, but from the interviews and everything I read and watched, he reminded me of my own father. He couldn't help but want to get down there to Florida himself and start looking for the man who killed his little girl. But then he said to himself, "What am I going to do? I'm just going to go door to door and say, 'Did you kill my daughter?'" So he realized this wasn't logical. He wouldn't be much help. It was so hard to sit back and do nothing. He was angry, sad, and anxious to know what happened to Chrissy. Investigators were about to knock on Brent Cole's apartment door at this time. Without warning, they had already made their way to Minnesota. They couldn't wait to get a good look at this guy who was last seen with Chrissy Lazaro. When he came to the door, he was well-dressed, clean-cut, polite, not what they were initially expecting to see. He agreed to speak with them. They informed him that they were there to investigate a murder, and he looked really confused, like, why in the world would these guys be coming all the way here? They informed him, "This is the woman we're looking for, Chrissy Lazaro." And of course, when someone hears that they're being interviewed about a murder, it makes them nervous. In Brent's case, confused. He's like, "I don't have anything to do with that." He's looking at the picture, and he denies knowing Chrissy or anything about what happened to her. He was in Daytona. He says he was on spring break and did go to Razzle's nightclub. He also had drinks with an attractive brunette that night, but she's alive and well. Jennifer Weathers, his girlfriend. The detectives weren't going to just take him at his word, but he goes one step forward and says, "Look, here's a picture of that night of me and my girlfriend." When Detective Palermo looked at that picture of Jennifer, his jaw dropped. He could not believe the resemblance to Chrissy. It was unbelievable. They could have been twins, and they were wearing the exact same outfit that night. Wow. Jennifer was there to speak to the detective herself, and she explained that they were there on that Saturday night, having drinks at the bar together, but they didn't see Chrissy, and they went back to their hotel room together. So now everything that the detectives thought they knew about Chrissy leaving the club wasn't accurate. Her friends most likely caught a quick glimpse of Jennifer and Brent, not Chrissy and another guy, leaving together. But she did go to the 701 Club that night without her friends. How'd she get there, though, and who was she with? The friends were re-interviewed, and though they were given this new information, they held strong to the fact they knew they saw Chrissy leave with a dark-skinned man that night, and they knew it was her. Regardless of whether there was another couple that looked similar, they definitely saw Chrissy leave with a similar-looking guy. The detectives went to the 701 Club, and they asked the staff if they recognized Chrissy. They brought a picture with them and showed it to all of the people, especially the bouncer, the manager at the door. The manager recognized Chrissy right away, and there's a reason. It was because of the guy she was with that night. He was giving the bouncer issues. As soon as they walked up to the door, his ID didn't quite look right, and the bouncer wanted to ask him a few questions. This guy kinda took offense to it. He snapped back at the bouncer. It's the manager's job to keep her patrons safe, and she looked at Chrissy and could tell she was nervous and scared. At that point, the manager made a mental note of this guy's appearance in case anything else were to happen inside the club that night. He was muscular, medium built. He had high cheekbones, dark skin, a mustache, and what she described as having a very distinctive Arsenio Hall-style haircut. Now, if you're not familiar, he was a famous comedian and talk show host back then, and to me, it's like a high, flat top fade. Tell me what you think. Here's the picture. As you can see, it's unique and distinctive. You'd definitely remember it if you saw it. So now that they have this feature to go on, they interviewed the staff members from the 701 South Club, and they recalled seeing Chrissy and the guy having a great time together. He was a complete gentleman. She definitely wasn't there against her will. But since they had seen him get kind of loud with the bouncer, who knows what he was capable of? Maybe he had a short fuse, and something happened after he had a few drinks in him, and they left the bar. The manager was able to provide a sketch artist with every detail that she could recall, and they created a composite and started taking it all over the town, asking if anyone had seen this man with Chrissy. No luck, so they released the sketch to the media. Now, this is the one I was able to dig up from old newspaper articles. The ones that I saw on shows were completely different, so I truly believe that this is the one they handed out and plastered all over the news, and it started to bring in a bunch of tips. One was from a guy who said he had seen this man. He frequented strip clubs, according to this guy, up and down the coast of Florida, last seen in Orange County. So this is the biggest lead that they've had at this time. Investigators go and they hand out flyers with Chrissy's picture and this guy's picture to clubs, regular clubs, bars, and even strip clubs from Daytona to Orange County, which was about an hour away towards the Orlando area. But they still do not get any leads. On October 17th, a week after Chrissy's body was found, she had been sent back to her family in New York, and they were finally able to lay her to rest. They had a beautiful memorial service at Pittsford Community Church, and over 500 people came out to mourn the loss of Christine Lazaro. Childhood friends, college friends, family, relatives, co-workers, they piled into the church to pay their respects. Frank was blown away. He said, "Holy cow," when he looked at the crowd. However, Chrissy's mom, Kathleen, declined to participate in the service. A family representative said she was not ready to talk about what happened, so she sat at the back of the church. She was too overwhelmed by her daughter's death, and she wanted to grieve privately. There were about 20 people who spoke about their memories of Chrissy and what she meant to them. Frank said that Chrissy was trusting and curious. She embraced life and explored it. But he had a message for everyone, something he thought Chrissy would have wanted them to hear, a word of wisdom and caution so that her loss was not in vain. He said that she would have wanted her friends to learn from her murder. His message was, don't drink and drive, don't do drugs, and don't make hasty decisions, with an emphasis on the last one. Frank said, I know for a fact, she would say, use the buddy system. This was in reference to the fact that Chrissy broke away from her friends. She was left alone. If someone would have been with her, if someone would have been watching, if they would have used the buddy system to alert one another of their plans to leave and not have left anyone behind, she might still be there. Her dad was haunted by his daughter's voice. He imagined her calling out to him in her final moments saying, Daddy, Teddy, help me, and knowing that he couldn't be there for her. That just broke my heart. It's gut-wrenching. A friend of Chrissy's named Brad Denker didn't want to speak at the actual funeral, but he did send a poem into the newspaper that he wrote about Chrissy, and I wanted to read it to you. I remember a face of beauty with eyes that would grab your heart, and a smile that shined like a star in a blackened sky, sounds of laughter and kindness that could enchant a room and bestow happiness on those around her. He ended with, we love you, Chrissy. She was very loved and lost way too soon. Detectives were determined to find the person who did this to her, but every lead that they had went cold. That's when they turned to someone more closer to home, Chrissy's boyfriend, Carl. He did somewhat match the description, and he was only 6 hours away at the time, so they tracked him down to ask him about his whereabouts the week Chrissy was in Florida. His coach made a statement with proof of a roster that showed that Carl was in South Carolina playing a game the night that Chrissy was murdered. But still, there were hours after that were unaccounted for, so they still needed to speak with Carl himself. And it was a good thing they did, because when they do, they get their next lead. They fly out to South Carolina to meet with him, and he's visibly distraught. Just like Frank mentioned, Carl is very polite. He cooperated fully. Unbelievably, he tells the detectives he spoke to Chrissy the night she was murdered. No, he wasn't in Daytona, but she called him sometime in the middle of the night. He was asleep when he answered, and he estimated it was between midnight and 2 a.m. She sounded just fine and bubbly, happy. She told him she was having a great time, but she missed him and wanted to reach out and say hello. He said they chatted for about 30 minutes. Detectives asked if he could tell where she was calling from, and he said he was sleeping and there wasn't much he could say. He didn't hear a lot of loud noise in the background. It wasn't a bar, but he could hear a TV on, and he didn't hear anyone else. Back then, in order to make a long-distance phone call, especially when you're out of town, you bought what's called a calling card. It basically has minutes on it, and you type in a number before the number that you want to call and be connected to, and that's how you pay for long-distance charges. While Chrissy had one of these, they traced the calling card, and they see that late-night call. It was at 1:30 in the morning, but they can't trace where it came from. But the 701 South Club is in the Texan Hotel, and the timeline would match up. If Chrissy left Razzles around midnight and made her way to the Texan, she could have placed that call either before going to that club or afterward. Maybe she was with someone that was staying at the Texan, and she was in their room. It had been 10 days, and they were still no closer to knowing what happened to Chrissy. And that's when Chrissy's friends gave detectives some information that they thought was not that important in the beginning, but maybe now it would be. Remember the first night the girls got there, and they kinda laid low? Well, Chrissy kind of didn't. She went down to the hotel bar all by herself to get a drink alone, and when she came back, she told the girls that she met a really hot bartender named Scott Henson. Now, the girls had already mentioned this to the police, but when they said he was white, they ruled him out because it wasn't a priority to check on, since she was seen with a dark-skinned man leaving the club that night, or so they thought. Chrissy's friend said that she and Scott had exchanged numbers. They planned to meet up sometime that week. But Chrissy couldn't wait. She decided to go out with him that night, after her shift ended. However, she came back alive and told her friends that they just walked down the beach and talked. They go to speak with Scott at the hotel bar, and he admits, "Yeah, I went out on a late-night walk with Chrissy." When they show him a picture, that's when it finally hits him that she's the spring breaker they found murdered on Easter morning. He tells investigators he was not even in town that day. He left early Saturday morning, a day before her body was found, to celebrate the holiday with his family out in Georgia. They confirmed his alibi. By now, all the locals in Daytona Beach are scared. Chrissy's death happened the last week of spring break when many of the students that flocked to this area were finally leaving, and her murder started a debate, including the mayor, who was now realizing that Daytona's reputation as a place to go and let loose and party till you pass out with uncontrollable crowds was really damaging the city's image. He felt it put an undue burden on the police and the community workers who had to clean up all the mess that was left behind. But others in town, who wanted their town to thrive, pointed out that it brought in way too much money to worry about that, and it would make up for all the troubles that the spring breakers may bring. They pointed out there hadn't been a murder in 13 years. Sure, there were petty crimes and hotels got trashed, but they argued, did anyone turn up dead until now? No. Well, an officer named A.J. Tolley from the Daytona Beach Police Department said, "Listen, the reports of men forcing women to have sex with them against their will and other indecent incidents were being reported more and more. In just March alone, there were a dozen reports. It doesn't look good for the city, but more importantly, these are victims, and they're coming forward. And yes, someone did die." Just 2 days afterward, there was already a headline in the front page of a local newspaper that said, "Time to de-emphasize spring break." It looks like the mayor got more than he bargained for when all he saw was dollar signs chasing after those MTV viewers. The case they were referring to that happened 13 years before this was the murder of Carol Ann Barrett. She was an 18-year-old from Ohio who was on spring break in Daytona in March of 1980. Just like Chrissy, she had dreamed of spending her vacation in the sun. She also traveled with a group of 8 of her friends, and they all stayed at the Treasure Island Inn Hotel on the beach, just like the one Chrissy's friends were in. In Carol's case, she was partying in her hotel room with her group of friends when she and a guy decided to leave and go to a store down the street. When they were going down the hotel hallway, a man stopped them at gunpoint and forced them to open their hotel room door. He wasn't expecting to see all those people inside, but he didn't care. He proceeded to tell all of them, guys and girls, to strip down. Then he robbed them all and tried to kidnap a girl named Pam, but she started to scream, so he took poor Carol instead because she was calm and quiet. Then he forced the rest of them, the whole group, onto the balcony, where he locked the sliding glass door behind him. They were stuck out there screaming. No one was coming to help them. So one boy climbed onto a neighboring balcony and was able to knock on the door and get the people inside to call the cops. Unfortunately, it was too late. Carol's barely clothed body was later found on the side of the road, 100 miles away in Jacksonville. She too was shot in the head, like Chrissy. This case is still unsolved, despite the fact that a number of her friends had seen this man who took her and could give a clear description to the police. Both Chrissy and Carol had execution-style deaths. These are the type where there's no time to fight. You don't even realize you're going to be harmed. You're defenseless, and you're not expecting it to happen. It's quick, but it's no less horrifying. Now, there's one more similarity between these two cases. They were both cold. 4 months go by, and Chrissy's family is desperate for answers. They put out a $100,000 reward for any information that would lead them to her killer. No one comes forward. By September, Chrissy's brother Frank finally makes his first public statement. He was at his aunt's table, talking to reporters for the very first time. There were pictures of Chrissy all over the house, even one from the night she was killed, wearing that white baseball jersey. Frank said, "Why couldn't I protect her?" That's something that bothered him. She was all alone. His little sister didn't have a chance. The fact he couldn't be there to save her haunted him. He told reporters that the pair were always there for each other. It was as though they knew what the other was feeling, or when they were in trouble. Frank was 23 at the time and a student at the University of Rochester. The loss of his sister had torn him apart. He said it was the hardest thing he ever had to go through. She was a friend, not only a sister. He described it as crippling, like a part of him was gone. Frank wanted to make one thing clear: it wasn't Chrissy's fault that she was killed. Many people had questioned why she left without her friends at night and placed the blame on her. Frank said that tarnished his sister's memory and that she was portrayed poorly by the media as an underage partier, a boozer, and even a drug addict, which she wasn't. He said she was a typical 20-year-old doing what everyone else her age was doing. Victim blaming often occurs. She should have done this, she could have done that. Frank acknowledged that it's easy to judge, but insisted, "We don't know what position she was in. We don't know what we would have done in a similar situation." He emphasized that we can only learn from these situations, and that is one of his goals in telling these stories. It is not Chrissy's fault that she was murdered. The only person that's responsible for that is the evil person who chose to commit that crime. She wasn't a bad person. As a matter of fact, she was someone who was always there for others. She was the type to never say goodbye without saying she loved you. Frank recounted a time when he was really sick and Chrissy was by his side all night. She even fell asleep on the floor next to his bed, taking care of him. His message was, don't take things for granted. Don't take the people you love for granted. He said that the relationships he has now are treasures he values more than ever, because you don't know how long they will last. He also mentioned he was trying to heal and that he thinks Chrissy would have told him to go live his life with the energy and excitement that she did. He was trying, and he ended with, "Someday, I hope I can do that." It's bittersweet, and I think it's a great takeaway. We don't know how much time we have with anyone else, so cherish every moment. In this case, those moments turned into months and then years, and Chrissy's family and investigators held on to the hope that one day, with advanced technology or some other method, her murder would be solved. It wouldn't be until 2010 that someone who was keeping a secret about Chrissy's murder would finally be compelled to reveal the truth. 17 years after Chrissy was found dead, a call came into the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. It was April 20th, 2010. Warden Burl Kane from Louisiana State Penitentiary was on the other end. This penitentiary is better known as Angola. You might have heard that name before. It's the name of the slave plantation the prison is built on. It's a very famous prison, and the warden there at the time held the key to solving the case, a key to an inmate's cell. They were housing 38-year-old Romalis Gordon, who was serving 2 back-to-back life sentences for being caught on CCTV, robbing Lucky's Truck Stop Casino in Louisiana, and murdering 2 women execution style. Assistant manager Schaefer Francis, a 29-year-old mother of two, and a 64-year-old woman named Brenda Granny Robertson, who was an unarmed security guard. Romales was a regular there in 2006 when the crime occurred. Schaefer, the 29-year-old he gunned down, was a hard worker who never complained about her shifts at Lucky's. She was the first to volunteer her time to help others and always had a great attitude, according to her friends and family. She was willing to take on extra tasks, and everyone that knew her said she was also an amazing mother who was always by her daughter's side. Now she was gone. During her time as the assistant manager of this small casino, Schaefer monitored the flow of money from poker machines that were emptied by their employees and distributed that money to players as change. Math and numbers were her thing. This was her passion, and she enjoyed her work. In her free time, she spent time watching movies with her boyfriend. Romales Gordon's other victim, Brenda Robertson, the 64-year-old, weighed less than 100 pounds, but was the one who always helped Lucky stay trouble-free. There hadn't been any trouble until this double murder occurred. Schaefer and Brenda had a great working relationship and loved one another like family. No one at Lucky's casino had ever felt threatened or unsafe, so these murders were a shock to everyone. The prosecution in this case was initially planning to seek the death penalty against Romales. However, he pleaded guilty to Brenda and Schaefer's murders in exchange for 2 life sentences for first-degree murder in 2007. While he was serving that sentence, he heard a sermon from a visiting pastor named Jim Savala from the Brooklyn Tabernacle in New York City. He visited Angola once a year, and this sermon inspired Romales to write a letter to the warden. It was laced with biblical references like this one where he said, "How can I praise God on one hand, and in my heart and mind I know what pain I've caused someone for years and years. God sent me here for a reason, and until I confess what I have done, I cannot be freed from the belly of the whale." He said in his letter that the programs at the prison made him realize that you can't run from your past. He wrote, "All my family problems and sickness were because of my secret. I want to confess what I have done. I have all the details that only the murderer would have. I want to confess now. Now I'm going to hurt my own family by telling you the truth." But at the end he wrote, "Give the family closure. It's the right thing to do." That closure came in the form of confessing to the warden that he killed Christine Lazaro. Romales told details to the warden about the murder that had never been released to the public, like that the shots were fired at close range, one to her cheek and the other above her ear. The warden relayed all this information to the police department, and they ran his name. They discovered that Romales Gordon had been arrested on a trespassing charge just 40 miles from DeBerry, where Chrissy's body was dumped on the side of the road just 2 months after her murder. When they arrested him, they confiscated a .38 caliber weapon, which was the same caliber used on Chrissy. Naturally, they tried to find this gun. They wanted to see if it was still in evidence. However, it had been so long, and because they didn't know it was connected to any other crimes, especially a bigger crime, it had been destroyed. Detectives flew out to Louisiana to speak with Romales to make sure he was telling the truth. Right away, he became very emotional, and the detectives did not think he was putting on a show. By this time, the inmate worked as an orderly at the prison and was in charge of making sure that other inmates who had committed disciplinary offenses were on their best behavior. Romales had a really good conduct report and truly seemed to want to just get the secret off his chest. Once they believed they had their man, they had a lot of questions, the biggest one being, why? He explained that he was 21 years old at the time and had moved to Orlando about 4 months before the murder. He was on the run from police in Louisiana. One night, he was having fun hanging out in Daytona for spring break when he ran into Chrissy at Razzles. They started chatting and were hitting it off. He really liked her and they were having a great time. To impress her, he lied about what he did for a living, claiming to be a rich record producer. They left and went to the 701 Club to grab some food, then headed to his motel room out in DeBerry. According to him, they had sex together, and he had also done a lot of cocaine and had been drinking all night long. Chrissy made a phone call while he went to the bathroom to do some more drugs. When he came out, he saw Chrissy going through some of his things, which included a couple of his fake IDs. He had warrants for his arrest and was using an alias at the time. When he saw her doing this, he became super paranoid, believing she was going to turn him in. Initially, he claimed he was just going to drop her back off in Daytona Beach, but instead, he freaked out. According to him, on the way to drop her off, he told her to get out of the car, and that's when he ended up taking her life instead. It's a completely senseless motive. There was never any indication that Christine ever had intercourse with him or with anyone before her murder. So, I'm not really sure I believe that this is exactly how things went down. If I were to give my perspective, it would be mere speculation. We will never know the truth, but I find it hard to believe because it reminds me of the Samantha Josephson case, where there was a big struggle, unlike in this case. Romales wrote a letter to Chrissy's dad asking for forgiveness, which was something that wasn't easy for Frank to read or come to terms with. How could he forgive the man who had callously taken his innocent daughter's life? But he's a Christian and thought about it. He realized he wasn't the ultimate judge, so he was able to extend forgiveness to this man. However, Chrissy's friends did not feel the same way, and I tend to side more with her friends on this one. After hearing that someone had confessed to Chrissy's murder, it brought them back to that day in the hotel room when they first got the news. Rita said she hates Romales. It doesn't matter if he's sorry, he doesn't bring Chrissy back, and he doesn't fix anything. Kelly expressed gratitude that he confessed, but believes he should pay for taking away their friend and for taking someone's life. And he will pay, he is paying. A year later, on May 25, 2011, Romales Gordon pleaded guilty to Christine's murder. He was given yet another life sentence in Angola prison. This was a case that Detective Palermo, who was now retired by that time, had never forgotten. He was so happy that the family could get closure and to know that Chrissy's killer was behind bars forever. He doesn't think this case would have ever been solved. They put so much work into it, but without this confession, they probably would never have known who killed Chrissy. Military life? It's definitely not for everyone. Imagine you met the man of your dreams. You're a successful nurse and your husband is a decorated sergeant in the Air Force. You have 2 beautiful children together, but before your 30th birthday, someone with their own selfish desires and plans not only ruins your life but takes it from you. The story takes place in San Antonio, Texas. It's in the deep south of Texas, only about 150 miles from the Mexican border. It's a historical town. This is where the Battle of the Alamo took place back in 1836 when the Mexican troops invaded Texas. San Antonio is one of the biggest tourist spots for anyone who wants to visit Texas. It's a beautiful city with a lot to do and a lot to see. One popular destination is the Riverwalk area, where you can enjoy shopping, margaritas, and little Tex-Mex cuisine. Or you can ride a river taxi, which looks super fun. There's live music in the streets and lots of restaurants to enjoy. I want to actually visit. I haven't had a chance yet, but it's definitely on my list. Aside from being a top tourist destination, San Antonio is also a place that a lot of military families call home. It's actually known as Military City, USA. It has been home to a consistent military presence for close to 300 years and has one of the nation's largest active and retired military populations. The largest military base in San Antonio is the Lackland Air Force Base. Now, I knew going into this case that I didn't know much about the military. I thought I knew enough, but I learned a lot, and I hope that I can impart some of my new knowledge on you. If you're like me and you don't have a military background, my grandfather was in military intelligence for the United States, but he died when I was young, so I did not have the experience of military life. It is a whole different world for those who live in it. Many of you can and most likely relate. It's a very close-knit community, especially if you're on the bases. One of the families living in San Antonio in the 80s was the Lipscombs, Kathleen and William Lipscomb, and their 2 young children. William, who went by Bill, was a high-ranking master sergeant in the Air Force at the time, and his beautiful wife Kathleen was a nurse. I want to introduce you to both of them, and I'll start with Kathleen. Ella Kathleen Adams was born on September 1st, 1956 in Louisiana to her mother, Nadine Adams, and her father, Charles Leonard Adams. Ella went by her middle name Kathleen, and it was finally shortened affectionately to Kathy, so I'm going to call her Kathy in this video. Kathy had one sister, Darlene, and she and Darlene were very close. The sisters were also very close to their mother. Kathy grew into a stunning woman. She was a petite little platinum blonde with crystal blue eyes, and she wasn't just gifted in the looks department. Kathy was very intelligent. She valued academics and studied to become a nurse. That was her dream. She hadn't even gotten far on her journey into her medical career when she met William Lipscomb. Now, because this isn't one of my deep dives, I'm not going to go into detail about their childhoods, but what I do want to do is focus as much as I can on what I gathered about what life was like for Kathy and William before tragedy struck. William, who I said went by Bill, was around 4 years older than Kathy. He was handsome, hardworking, and a military man. Some women are even more attracted to men when they're in uniform, and they were the perfect couple. They fell in love and married when they were young. Kathy was about 20, and Bill was around 24. It's pretty common for individuals in the military to get married young. Sometimes it's for the benefits, and other times it's for the companionship of someone they can come home to. Being in the military is not an easy job. It can be lonely being away for so long. Marriage allows these men to feel like they're coming home to someone. It also has its financial benefits, like housing and increased compensation. We won't know the full extent of the reasons why they got married when they did, but there's also the fact that being in love means you will do anything to be close to your partner. It made sense to both of them, and before they knew it, it was 1986, and they were living in San Antonio with 2 beautiful children. They had a home just a few miles from the Air Force Base. Everyone that knew the couple knew that they were a perfect match. One of the reasons is that they were both hardworking and attractive. They looked like Barbie and Ken. You know, they just had that gorgeous look to them. They just matched. He was like the tall, dark, handsome type, and she was the bubbly blonde. Kathy worked as a nurse at the University of Texas Health Science Center, and she was very skilled in her field. She was rising up in her career. Kathy was ambitious. Her plan wasn't to be stagnant and content. She wanted to continue her education and excel at many different specialties, very similar to the way Bill approached his work. This tends to bring couples together, similar outlooks on life and career. Bill's career was taking off at a very high speed. This is what I had to learn about when it came to the military, because everything I read about Bill was extraordinary. The ranks and titles meant nothing to me since I didn't understand how it all worked. But once I did, I was like, okay, wow, this man, he's like legit, he's a superstar. You've probably heard the phrase, enlisted in the military. It's the most common way that someone enters. They talk to a recruiter, go through their basic training, and work hard to move up through different ranks as they do. Not only are they decorated with different medals and badges on their uniforms, but the uniforms also change as you move up this ladder. And not only that, the higher someone moves up in the ranks, the more responsibility, power, and authority they have. In order for us to truly know Bill, it's important we understand how this works, how he ranked up, how someone gets there, and what it entails. I found it pretty fascinating, so let me show you the ranks in the Air Force for reference, and I will also explain for those that are just listening. Here are the enlisted ranks. On the top, they start with E1, which is a basic airman, and they go to E9, which is the Chief Master Sergeant. That sounds so important, and it really is. Just to understand how hard it is to get there, one statistical example shows it takes approximately 17 years to get to where Bill was, and he was only 33. This man was being promoted left and right. To help me understand the complexity, I found a YouTube channel called 21 Shades of J. It's right here. I'm going to put it up on the screen. He creates videos explaining how to rank up in the Air Force. He got to E6 in 6 years, and it's literally referred to as E6 in 6 because it's quite an accomplishment. It takes a lot of studying, and I had no idea. But there's something called the Weighted Airman Promotion System, abbreviated as WAPS, not to be confused with anything else. It consists of tests that an airman has to take so they can rise up the ranks, and they're intense. I found a study guide, and it was 200 pages long. Wow, I read somewhere that Bill wasn't even 30 years old, and he was already a Master Sergeant, which is an E7 rank. He wouldn't just pass these exams, he would ace them. Something else about Bill stood out: his actual position in the Air Force. He was a military training instructor, and man did I watch some interesting videos on this. This is a very important position, and I just want to point out that now we have a lot of resources. This was back in the 80s. They didn't have the resources like a YouTube video by someone who's already gone through everything and can give you advice on how to study. Everything had to be done the old school way. Instructors like this are actually looked at as having one of the most important jobs in the Air Force. They are the drill instructors. They are the very first impression that an entry-level airman gets about what it means to be an American soldier. There's a lot of pride in a position like this. There's no place for mediocrity for Bill. Those below him both feared him and admired him. It was Bill's job to take these kids coming into the Air Force and mold them into who they would be known for the rest of their lives. These individuals will never forget their training instructor. So Bill took his job very seriously, maybe even more seriously than anything else in his life. It's what he lived for and where he found his identity. I'm telling you all this because as the head of the household, and a military one at that, his status and reputation mattered. Therefore, the Lipscomb's lifestyle revolved around the importance of Bill, exhibiting a stellar reputation, professionalism, integrity, honor, and excellence. The military life isn't for everyone, but luckily Kathy knew how to support Bill the way that he needed. Through an entirely different profession, being a nurse, she also had to exhibit her own sense of responsibility, respect, and professionalism. They made a perfect pair. The couple was looked at as a model for not only those around them who knew them intimately and admired them, but also for all of the airmen that came through Bill's training. The Lipscombs had it all. They both loved their careers and their kids. Kathy was a doting and supportive wife, raising their 2 children while working hard during the day and caring for the children after school. On the weekends, she would attend all of the military events, all the balls, the gatherings. She even loved to cheer him on at the games he played. He was in the military softball league. But things at home were a little different. Kathy was used to being in Bill's shadow. She was okay with it, especially when they were in public. But when it came time for Bill to display interest in her work, it seemed like he almost resented her. Kathy's hospital had gotten a research grant at one point, and she was excited about the possibility of applying for a research position. But Bill wasn't thrilled. He didn't think she needed to add any more to her plate. It was like he was okay with where her career was, as though he was the one responsible for making that decision for her. It does take a certain type of person to be a drill sergeant. They can be rigid and controlling. That may be okay on base, but it's not great for a relationship. I don't know if you can relate to this, if you've ever been with someone like this, but Kathy just felt that Bill did not take her job seriously. She felt belittled. He was used to talking to his airmen in a rough tone, and he would forget that Kathy was his wife. He would say things like, "Well, you just sit around and change bedpans all day or wipe people's butts, so what's important about that?" This was tough because Kathy had a lot of ambition, and she was sick of living in Bill's shadow. She loved and respected him, of course, but she began to become distant. If you take that again and again, you're going to retreat. There's only so much someone can take. This caused them both to be distant and to throw themselves into their work even more than their relationship at home. This was actually a positive thing for Kathy. She wanted to do research in the OBGYN department, so she applied for the position, which required testing, report writing, and putting in samples of her work. To her delight and surprise, Kathy got the position, and it was a big deal for her. This was building her confidence. It gave her a sense of purpose and pride. When she got home and let Bill know that she and a few colleagues were going to go out and celebrate, instead of being happy and congratulating her, he seemed to resent the entire situation. But that didn't stop Kathy. She began her new role and excelled quickly. It was like, why can he do it and not her? I think that's how I would feel. I've definitely been there. But we have to remember that we don't know what couples agreed to when getting into the relationship. We don't know those unspoken things that are not public. We don't know if he asked her, "Will you be my supportive wife? Stay home with the kids. I will give all the military benefits and support you." We don't know. Nevertheless, this doesn't stop Kathy. She is excited and begins her new role, rising up quickly. Her diligence doesn't go unnoticed. Kathy is asked to join a new research team led by one of the most prestigious doctors in the OBGYN department, Dr. David Pearl. This is a huge accomplishment for Kathy. Dr. Pearl chooses the best of the best for his team, and he is delighted to have Kathy on board. Now she can use all of the skills that she has learned to master and showcase her expertise. Unlike Bill, Dr. Pearl understands the complexities involved in her specialty. He is there to provide encouragement and praise. Kathy feels the best when she's at the hospital. It's where she feels that she belongs. Home starts to be a place that she would rather not be, and Kathy's identity is moving away from being a wife and a mother to an OB/GYN nurse and beyond. She intends on continuing her education, and Dr. Pearl approves. Now Kathy is choosing to spend even longer hours at work, away from Bill but closer to Dr. Pearl, who is thankful for her hard work and dedication. Kathy feels appreciated and seen when she is in his presence. It boosts her self-esteem. Now she comes home smiling, happy, and on top of the world, and Bill can see that. Considering he knows he isn't the one putting a smile on her face, he starts to wonder what or who is. At this point, as they say, they were two ships just passing in the night. With their daily routines being so different, they weren't spending any quality time together. Instead, Kathy starts to talk to Dr. Pearl. It started with little things, as it always does, like when he would compliment her. She would be so grateful and let the words escape her lips. "Those words my husband doesn't say." So that's how this started. The way he treated her was the opposite of the way that Dr. Pearl did. Kathy was stunning on the outside, but she was also very sweet, likable, caring, and generous. The list goes on. Soon enough, she and Dr. Pearl were connecting on more than just a professional level. They were starting to connect on a more personal one. She was now calling him by his first name, David, so I will too. Kathy and David were harmlessly flirting. I mean, it can seem harmless, but they were just building each other up here and there, and it felt okay since both of them were married. Yes, David is married too, yet he begins to confide in Kathy about the troubles that he and his wife are going through, and the two begin to bond. Sooner or later, David and Kathy are having lunches together outside of the hospital. It always starts innocent, doesn't it? It's like boundaries. I guess they did exist, but they were becoming more and more blurred. In the spring of 1986, David finally crosses the line and invites Kathy to his place. But wait, it's not the home he shares with his wife. No, instead, to Kathy's surprise, David tells her that he and his wife are actually separated, and he lives in his own apartment near the hospital. Was Kathy thinking about leaving Bill? Well, it turns out when confiding in David, she says yes, she was thinking about it. She had actually attempted to leave once before, but Bill wouldn't let her go. If a couple wants a divorce, they have to go through a legal separation first for a designated amount of time, which is usually defined by the particular state they were married in. For example, here in California, it's a 6-month period, and it varies in different states. So, David and Kathy bond over their marriage difficulties, and David explains he's separated from his wife. The more they see one another alone, the more tension builds, especially in Kathy. She hasn't been close to Bill in a while. He was so controlling and demeaning. In contrast, David was carefree, caring, and gentle. Ultimately, they cross the line. They end up having sex. Of course, they do. If they didn't want this to happen, they should not have allowed it to get to this point alone in David's apartment, where they weren't under the watchful eyes of their colleagues and superiors. Over the next few months, Kathy begins to fall in love with David, and it seems that David feels the same. All the while, Kathy is hiding this from Bill, but he has his suspicions, especially because there are nights that Kathy doesn't make it home until very late, like after midnight. She keeps telling him she's working on a project, but Bill has a feeling she is not telling the truth. Their relationship is strained, they're no longer intimate, and Kathy is just going through the motions. Bill is feeling neglected, possibly betrayed, and begins taking more and more interest in extracurricular activities outside of his work, like his softball league. Kathy goes to his games and notices something different. Bill seems to be getting a little more attention than usual, and he's paying more attention than usual to all of the young cadets that he trains in the Air Force, all the young women. They're cheering him on. This is their drill sergeant, and they're laughing, smiling, and hugging him. It's getting a little too close, in Kathy's opinion, but who is she to pass judgment, right? There is a saying that two wrongs don't make a right. What they could have benefited from was some actual communication, but instead, both became cold and distant. Kathy was no longer interested in having sex with Bill. All she could think about was David. People in these love triangles sometimes say they feel like they're cheating on their new lover with their husbands, so they stop having sex with their husbands. We can't ever know exactly what Kathy was feeling, but her actions say a lot. She considered the marriage over. Bill, on the other hand, is not catching on and is not ready to let their marriage completely die. He starts questioning her about where she's going and where she's been, and this doesn't end well. It only leads to arguments. Kathy insists that she's just working and that he should stop interrogating her, but it's becoming harder and harder to keep her affair a secret, mostly because she wants more from David. She wants to be with David, and I don't mean just in his bed. She wants him to commit to her. That same spring of 1986, Kathy thinks of a plan to spend more time with her lover away from Bill, where he cannot monitor what's going on. She decides to register for a medical conference that David's going to, and it's 1,000 miles away. Kathy thought this would be perfect. Now she has a legitimate excuse. She didn't feel like she had to hide anything. She didn't even have to hide David, because when they were away together, they were together. No one knew them 1,000 miles away. There was no social media in 1986 like there is now. No one was taking pictures or videos with their iPhones and sending them to someone's partner as evidence of infidelity. It's just so easy to get caught these days. It's a wonder why anyone even tries to cheat. But back then, it was as though these lovers were in their own worlds. They could walk down the street holding hands, acting like Mr. and Mrs. Dr. Pearl. Kathy was in heaven. She loved David. When he walked into a room, time would stand still. There was just something special about him. Everyone saw it, but she got to experience it, and that gave her a rush that didn't compare to anything else. Even though she was literally cheating with a married man, she found herself imagining what it would be like to be with David, to be his wife. She asked him if they could be together, and he told her he loved spending time with her. It felt right, but he had to wait until his divorce was final. Then, of course, they could be together. There was no question about that. Kathy felt loved, cherished, and listened to. She had someone to confide in and talk to about all her problems, and she looked up to him. He taught her so much about work and life. She was infatuated with David. He was the complete package. He was handsome, smart, hardworking, and fun, and he just got her. When they were together, it was just David and Kathy. Everything was perfect as long as Bill didn't find out. But Bill wasn't oblivious. While Kathy might have been in her own little world with David, Bill was living in reality. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to piece the facts together. The long hours, the smiles, the happiness not coming from him. The trips, Bill had had enough. He begins looking through Kathy's things when she's gone at that conference, and he's devastated by what he finds. My heart really breaks for him in this situation. He's had this aha moment, but it's also a soul-crushing moment that confirms his worst fear. I know that feeling all too well. Your heart starts to race, you can't breathe, your body feels hot, you get dizzy, and you can't think. You just stare. That's what was going on with Bill. He was staring at a packet of birth control pills. At that exact moment, he knew in his heart that Kathy was being unfaithful. Bill had a vasectomy, so there was no need for Kathy to use contraceptives with him. She wasn't even having sex with him anyway. That's really devastating. Cheating is one of the worst betrayals in a relationship. It breaks down everything: the communication, the trust, the vulnerability, and the love. It just extinguishes love in the blink of an eye. Bill puts all the evidence together, and it's obvious who Kathy is having an affair with. Dr. David Pearl, the distinguished medical specialist, a man who made more money than Bill and had a higher education. That felt humiliating to him. This isn't the picture-perfect life he wants to portray to the incoming airman. He's crushed. This isn't just about losing his beautiful, loving wife that he adores, no matter what. It's about what this will look like for his unblemished career. Everything about him was polished from head to toe, yet now his marriage is a mess. As soon as Kathy comes home, he confronts her. She was already ready to lay it all out on the table for him. She had made up her mind. She was in love with David, so she didn't lie. She didn't fight it. She told Bill the truth. She wanted a divorce. Can you imagine the pain Bill must have felt to hear his wife say those words? One part of you wants that confirmation, just to hear them admit they've done something wrong, but it also becomes a harsh reality once it's spoken. Some people can never come back from pain like that. Kathy doesn't hesitate. As soon as the conversation is over with Bill, she goes down and files for divorce. Now listen, I've talked about cheating in a lot of videos. I don't always ask your opinions on it, but there will be many discussions on this topic. I hear the immaturity card pulled as an excuse a lot. While she was a young woman when they got married, maybe she didn't have a lot of life experience, but that was a choice, and so is cheating. Sometimes I wonder why people don't just get a divorce first. At least that's what David was doing, right? He was in the separation stage. But I guess some people may not be able to fight those lustful thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Once the paperwork was filed, Kathy was over the moon with happiness, unlike Bill, who was most likely crying himself to sleep at night. Kathy couldn't wait to share the news with David. The new arrangement between Bill and Kathy was that Kathy would move into her own apartment with the kids, probably got that clue from David, and Bill would have visitation with the children every weekend. The oldest child was about 6 or 7 years old at the time, and I could not find out any more information about their names or anything else. It was the 80s, and I tried to find newspaper articles and stuff, but they kept it kind of under wraps. Things were going as well as could be expected in these circumstances. The visitations are going well. Kathy's enjoying her freedom. She's got her new apartment. Speaking of the apartment, it's Sunday afternoon on June 8th, 1986. Bill has the kids and is ready to bring them back to Kathy. When they arrive at Kathy's place, her car isn't there, but they go up to the door anyway. They knock, but there's no answer. So Bill decides to go back to the car, gets a piece of paper and a pencil, and leaves a note for Kathy to let her know the kids are safe. She wasn't home, so they went back to his place, and she can call or come get them whenever she gets a chance. Remember, there are no cell phones back then. There's no way for Bill to know where Kathy is, and she didn't tell him that she wouldn't be there. He expected her there on Sundays, like she always was when he dropped off the kids. It's not like her to leave without notice or not come back on time to take care of her children. Bill is irritated, but he's not alarmed at this point. However, some people are, her coworkers. As you probably guessed, Kathy did not show up to work the next morning. That was very unusual. It was very out of character for a woman like Kathy, who not only took her job seriously, but was literally dating her boss. She would never be a no-show at work. So her friends start calling around to her family members to check in, but no one has heard from Kathy. Just as the sun is coming up on Monday, June 9th, 1986, it reveals what Kathy's family has been looking for. In northwest Bexar County, just outside the city limits of San Antonio, a man thinks he sees something off the side of the road. It's in a rural area, not heavily populated. Police respond immediately, and when they arrive on the scene, they're confronted with a gruesome sight. There is a naked female with no identification, just her clothes next to her. It doesn't take long for police to identify the body as 29-year-old Kathy Lipscomb. Her coworkers had been searching for her all day. They had made reports and informed the police that they could not find her. Once it was announced that a body had been located, her coworkers were there to positively identify her. At first glance, there's not much at the crime scene in the way of evidence. They're looking toward the body for clues. One thing that stood out to the investigators immediately was the way Kathy's body looked. She was in a very peculiar position. It wasn't just that she was curled up in a fetal position. Her limbs were actually curled and twisted in a very unnatural way. It's something that the investigators had never seen before, and they wondered why she looked that way. They also noticed a clothesline right next to her body. Looking around for more evidence, it became pretty obvious that she had been dumped at this location. This is not where she was murdered. There were no significant signs like footprints, tire marks, or blood. However, it was apparent that there were bruises and marks around Kathy's neck, which led detectives to believe that she had been strangled and that this was probably the cause of death. At this point, there were no other visible physical wounds on her body, so they transported her to the medical examiner's office for a full autopsy. This is when some additional evidence came to light. But before I get into those details, it's important to jump back and tell you what was happening with her family and friends as they were finding out what happened. It goes without saying, but I will let you know. As soon as her mother and her sister were contacted, they were in shock, in total disbelief about what was happening. Her sister said that there were so many emotions going through her. There's going to be even more shocking news to come because they didn't know that Kathy had some secrets, and all of this will be coming to light as I get more and more into the story. When her friends and family were interviewed, they immediately informed the police that Kathy was going through a divorce with Bill, who was very high up in the Air Force. Immediately, alarm bells started going off. There was something significant at the crime scene, something that stood out. Remember how I told you that Kathy's clothes were next to her? Well, they weren't just thrown next to her body, they were meticulously placed right next to her in a fashion that was very distinctive. They were rolled. I don't know if you've ever seen the way individuals in the military roll their clothing to fit into their backpacks and other places to save space. This is called a Ranger roll. I'm going to show you an example of it right here on the screen. Like I said, people in the military do this to save room in their backpacks. You can fit a lot more in there if you roll up your clothes. This is a huge clue. Clearly, whoever did this must be in the military. It was a force of habit, they do it all the time, and they must have done it again in this state of mind. They're rushing to drop Kathy's body off, but why even leave her clothes there? Maybe Bill has some answers because he is the first one they call in for questioning. As soon as they let him know what happened and that Kathy was dead, he is in shock. There was a total look on his face like he could not believe this was happening. He turns white as a ghost, unable to understand how it could be possible. He tells them that he and the kids went over to her apartment the night before and she was nowhere to be found. He told them about the note he left for her. Of course, they're always going to suspect the partner, and not only that, he's in the military, so that links him right away to the way the clothing was folded. They were going through a divorce, so of course they're going to look at the husband. Bill is distraught. He's upset, talking about how he's been looking all over for her. He says, "I have nothing to do with it." When they press him about the affair with Dr. Pearl, which they had heard about from Kathy's coworkers during interviews, Bill admits, "Yeah, I know. I'm aware of the affair. I'm aware of everything that's going on, and I'm okay with it. I understand there's nothing I can do. Kathy's free to do what she wants. Those were her wishes." He says he's accepted the fact that Kathy has moved on, and there was nothing he could do about it. Next, the police want to see if there's anything unusual about Bill's appearance. Does it look like he's been scratched? Are there marks on his hands? Any defensive wounds or anything that would suggest a sign of a struggle? But they couldn't find anything. No bruises, no scratches. It didn't look like he had been involved in any kind of attack. Bill also provides an alibi. He was at home with his kids that weekend, including the night Kathy disappeared. Sadly, they do have to bring the children in for questioning, and both confirm that they were with their father the entire weekend. Bill also tells them to check with his second-in-command, Staff Sergeant Nicholas Richards, as he had also been with Bill all day. At this point, they can't spend all their time looking at just one person, especially someone who holds a high position in the military and who has literally made that his life. Bill isn't the type of person who would just go around doing things wrong. This man lives for perfection. So they decide to interview some of his colleagues, the people on his team at work. All of them tell the police that Bill would have nothing to do with anything like this. They go to Lackland Air Force Base and interview Nicholas. He confirms that, yes, he was with Bill all day on Sunday, hanging out at his place with the kids. Meanwhile, investigators are getting critical information elsewhere. so they shift their attention from Bill to someone else, the other man in Kathy's life. They go down to the hospital to interview Kathy's coworkers. They had already told the investigators about the affair with Dr. Pearl, but there's more. After telling the police everything I already mentioned, that Kathy was infatuated with him, that she was in love with him, that they went on vacations disguised as conferences and paraded their relationship around, they drop a bombshell on the investigators, something no one was expecting. Kathy wasn't the only one. That's right. Poor Kathy risked everything to be with David, but David wasn't really risking much. He had the upper hand in the relationship, not only with Kathy but with several other women he worked with. This man was hooking up with different nurses, doing the same things he did with Kathy. He took them to conferences, had them over to his apartment, and allowed them to fall in love with him, none of them knowing about the others. But it wasn't much of a surprise to people on the outside. They had been watching it all unfold. Maybe Kathy was in denial. She either didn't have a clue, or she was so blinded by infatuation that she didn't realize what was really going on. She had no idea what the truth was. I feel like this poor woman was manipulated, tricked. Her whole world was turned upside down on a promise that was never real. It takes two to tango, as the saying goes. I'm sure you've heard that before. And it wasn't just Kathy. This man knew what he was doing because he had done it time and time again. He had used his position of power to entice these nurses to come home with him and begin relationships. It turns out, he would tell every woman that he was going through a separation, but all along, that wasn't the case. The shocking part of it all had just come to Kathy. She had just found out that David was living a lie. When she filed for divorce from Bill, she was excited, and the first person she wanted to share that excitement with was David. But when she met with him to share the news, he said he wasn't ready to settle down with her, and Kathy was crushed. She didn't understand what was going on. For all we know, her very first relationship in life could have been with Bill. Kathy wanted answers, so she started digging into David's life. That's when she found out about all the other women. He didn't have any intention of committing to Kathy. He was just stringing her along like he did with every other woman. In fact, he wasn't even going through a divorce at all, and he had no plans to leave his wife. She had no idea any of this was going on. As far as she knew, they were happily married. David was actually a pretty perfect husband, aside from his cheating. He did everything for his wife. She had the house, the car, the kids, anything she wanted, the lavish lifestyle. Kathy confronted David, and at this point, she was desperate. Desperate times call for desperate measures. She threatened to expose David to his wife, saying that she would do anything to make David hers. She told him, "If you don't divorce your wife like you told me you would, and be with me, I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell her about us, and I'm going to tell her everything else I found out." But David was bold and said, "No, go ahead, I'm not leaving my wife." This must have been an incredible situation for Kathy, finding herself desperate like that. She probably thought, if I tell his wife she's gonna leave him and he'll be out with the trash, I don't want you anymore, and then Kathy could swoop in and make David hers. But it gets worse. The investigators called David in for questioning, but before that I want to go back to the autopsy report because I left you hanging. There's something they found that was very important. They found 4 red strands of hair on the clothing next to Kathy's body. They also determined that the cause of death was strangulation. But beyond that, there was a crucial clue that put Dr. Pearl right in their crosshairs, and at the top of their suspect list. They found semen in and on Kathy's body. They determined that Kathy had sex within 24 hours of her murder, and the bruises found on her body were thought to be signs of a struggle, suggesting that the intercourse could have been forced against her will. An interesting fact in this case, one that I hadn't heard in others I've done, is that when they examined the contents of Kathy's stomach, they found undigested Chinese food. This meant she had eaten a short time before her death. There were also ant bites on her legs, and since ant activity in that area happens during the day, they inferred that Kathy was probably placed at the location in the early morning hours, perhaps around 2 or 3 o'clock on Monday morning, when it was still dark. This suggested that Kathy died on Sunday night, the night she went missing, and specifically around dinner time on Sunday, the same night Bill couldn't find her. When they took those 4 strands of red human hair, they placed them under a microscope and noticed that the hairs had no roots. Typically, DNA is extracted from the root to establish a positive match, but they couldn't do that in this case. When they magnified the strands 100 times, they noticed the hair was dyed. This was important because now they had something they could compare to potential suspects. While the hair wasn't naturally red and lacked the root for definitive DNA matching, they could still compare it to other hair samples they found, setting them side by side to magnify and analyze for similarities. Beyond that, there was nothing else at the crime scene to go on. Keep in mind, this was 1986, and forensic testing was still in its infancy. There wasn't much to work with in terms of comparative analysis. Now, before I return to Dr. David Pearl being called in for questioning, there's something else that happened. When police arrived at Kathy's apartment to inspect the premises, her car was still missing, but they did find the note Bill had left on the door. They opened it, and it simply stated that she wasn't there, that he had the kids and they were safe, and that she could call or come pick them up as soon as she got home. But now, they're actually canvassing that apartment complex. They're going door to door, asking anyone if they saw anything out of the ordinary. And it turns out there was something peculiar happening over there in regard to Kathy's next-door neighbor, a man named Vincent. He happened to be a nurse at the same hospital that worked closely with Kathy. And this man is gone. He left town, moved out of the apartment the same day that Kathy went missing, and he didn't even give any appropriate notice to work. They didn't even have a forwarding address to send him his last paycheck, and they thought that was very suspicious. But not only that, another neighbor comes forward and says that she saw an unfamiliar red-headed woman come knocking on Kathy's door the day after her disappearance. No one answered the door, so this woman just walked away without saying a word. Remember, there were 4 strands of red hair found on Kathy's clothing, so this is strange. They make it a point to focus their attention on trying to locate both of these individuals. Meanwhile, they get Dr. David Perlin for questioning, but guess what? He's not alone. His wife Linda is with him. Yes, the supportive wife is right by his side. Not only that, David doesn't seem fazed when he hears that Kathy has been killed. His demeanor is cold, and he reacts to the questions with precise answers, not giving up too much information. He does so quickly and simply, and like cut and dry, admits that he had an affair. He does this in front of his wife, who he probably already told, and he says, "Yes, I was with Kathy that weekend, and I was with her on Saturday night." He may have been the last person to see her alive. While David's admitting all this, Linda is by his side, and it's clear to detectives that she has no intention of leaving her wealthy doctor husband. It's so painfully obvious that she's not going to leave him that they even start to think she may have been involved in some way. Jealousy is definitely a huge motivator, not to mention the way that Kathy was killed. Strangulation can be a personal crime. This could have been related to the love triangle that Kathy unknowingly found herself in. Detectives think Linda has way more to lose than anyone else. She would lose her husband, her luxury lifestyle, and it turns out David doesn't even stay at that apartment that he brings women to. No, he comes home to Linda every single night. They wonder if David and Linda were in on it together. They think that maybe Kathy was being silenced. Detectives try to press the couple, and they clam up. They tell them, "We're not talking about anything else unless we have an attorney," and that's not a good sign. The interview ended so abruptly, so now the detectives have to turn back to the evidence that they already have. The information they gathered about the suspicious redhead and the neighbor. It turns out the neighbor just happened to get out of a relationship that same weekend. He and his boyfriend got into an argument the weekend that Kathy was murdered, so he picked up and moved away to another part of Texas. His leaving had nothing to do with Kathy's death, just a coincidence. But what about the redhead? That can't be a coincidence, right? They found red hairs at the scene, but it turns out that was a coworker. They dropped by to check on Kathy the day she didn't show up for work. Still, it doesn't explain the red hairs on the clothing. But let's move forward. A week after finding Kathy's body, her car is finally located. It was abandoned in a parking lot nearby. They didn't find anything of significance inside the vehicle, unfortunately. There wasn't anything to move forward on, and the case goes cold. No one is connected to Kathy's murder for 2 whole years. 2 years go by without any answers. Kathy's mother, Nadine, and sister Darlene are at their wits' end. They decide to hire their own private investigator named Tom Bevins. He's actually known as Detective Death. He's the one that families go to when police cannot find their loved one's killers. They have faith in Tom. They think that he's going to be the one to track this killer down. The first thing he does is go back all the way down that line of any suspects they had. He also wants all of the personal items that were collected from Kathy's apartment. There were personal items taken from Kathy's apartment, and they've been stored as evidence. During the 2 years that the case was cold, Bill remarried to a woman named Beverly, and he and the children moved to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Dr. Perlin is still working as the director of the OBGYN department at the hospital, and no one has been charged in Kathy's murder. As Tom is sifting through all of Kathy's personal effects, a diary catches his eye. It's more of a date book, something she used to keep track of her daily activities, her thoughts, everything. It was very important to her. She never left home without it. She used it every single day. Tom goes through every single entry, and 2 of them have additional notations on them that stand out to him. One said, "Went to Bill's ball game." Lisa was there, by the way. Some shows I watched said this woman's name was Lisa, and others said Shannon. I'm gonna go with Lisa since one of the reports that I relied on for factual information had other things correct, while others did not, and the one that was correct used Lisa. So, Lisa it is. Tom wants to know who this Lisa is. Why would Kathy be writing down another woman's name? This was in the same time frame that things were going downhill in her marriage to Bill, sometime in the spring of 1986. The other passage that stood out simply stated, "Numerous calls and nights out passing information around concerning the WAPS testing. Bill has all the questions for the test." Tom has no idea what this test was, but I referred to it in the beginning. It's the Weighted Airman Promotion Test, which all military personnel must pass in order to gain promotion. Armed with this new information, Tom tries to track down Lisa. His first stop, Lackland Air Force Base. Tom calls and asks if anyone knows if there is a Lisa there that was connected to Bill or Kathy. Sure enough, someone puts him in contact with a Lisa Johnson. Lisa was a young cadet who was enlisted while Bill was a drill sergeant. She was very pretty and spent a lot of time around Bill. She was actually one of his biggest fans. It's true, she was one of those women at Bill's softball game that Kathy attended, the ones that were giving him a little more attention than usual. It was obvious to those around Bill that Lisa had a thing for him. Bill was off limits, not only because he was married, but because of his high position, and that was exciting for a young woman like Lisa. She actually made it her mission to somehow get close to him, like coming out to his softball games and cheering him on. She was known to be wild and fun and exciting. She would just come to these games, cheer him on, give him a big hug, tell him he's doing great, and build up his ego. Actually, many people who didn't know Bill and Kathy thought that Bill and Lisa were a couple. They were seen a number of times on and off base, so everyone was aware that Kathy was seeing Dr. Pearl, but this was the first time they heard that Bill was seeing anyone. And now he's already remarried to yet another woman, so it's a little confusing. Tom gets in touch with Lisa and tells her what the call is in reference to, and she immediately gets emotional. She admits, "I had a sexual relationship with Bill." There were times when Bill was going through things with Kathy, and this woman would attempt to come to his rescue. She inflated his ego and built him up. One afternoon, she decided to make her move. She knew that Bill and Kathy had gotten into an argument, so she invited Bill back to her place, and that was the first time of many that they were intimate. Well, that's against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Bill was not supposed to be engaging in this type of conduct. It could cost him his career. So they did what they could to keep it quiet. As fulfilling as it was to fill this void that Bill had with his wife leaving him, Lisa was merely a distraction. It didn't fix anything. Bill's relationship with Lisa was just one of convenience. She was there, and he just needed a warm body. However, Bill's relationship with Lisa was one of the things that pushed Kathy to divorce him. Yes, I know she was also having an affair, but it turns out, as investigators were digging deeper and interviewing her coworkers and her family, Bill was not a nice man. Bill was controlling, he was belittling. He did this to her for years. They were married for 8 years, and most of those years consisted of Bill controlling every aspect of Kathy's life. She had had enough. Her family described her as very soft, caring, generous, and sweet. All she wanted was a man to love her. All she wanted was to raise her children and be with someone who actually cared. It's sad that in the end, she falls for a guy who doesn't. But all the while, Bill is also having an affair. When she witnessed the two of them together at that ball game, she knew in her gut it was a sign to call it quits and move on. When Tom questioned Lisa, she immediately says that she's going to need an attorney. But with her attorney present, she begins to tell Tom what she knows. She says that Bill had told her he wanted to kill Kathy, and it wasn't because of the affair. It was because of another kind of cheating. That's when Lisa shed light on another passage from the diary, the one regarding Bill knowing the answers to the WAPS test. Lisa was insinuating that Bill was cheating on the exam. This is huge. It was too much for Tom to take on by himself, since these cheating allegations involve the Air Force. They had to call in Dr. Charles McDowell. He joins the investigation as part of the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Together, he and Tom uncover even more information about Bill. For one, he took out a $315,000 life insurance policy on Kathy 7 months before her murder. That time frame isn't as suspicious as some time frames that we've talked about, and that I've seen, but he was living off of this money with his new bride Beverly, and they definitely flaunted it. When they pressed Lisa about the WAPS answers, she caved, she had to. This was vital information and way bigger than they thought. It turns out that this man who walked around all high and mighty wasn't just a cheater in the bedroom. He wasn't just a cheater when it came to ranking in the Air Force. He was running an entire cheating scam. Yes, unreal. Apparently, he had gone together with other men in the Air Force, and they exchanged notes. Now they were selling the answers for a high price. This scheme was spreading all over the United States. Lisa says that Kathy knew all about it. All it would take was one phone call to the base commander, and it would ruin Bill's entire career. It would ruin his life. Apparently, the first time that Kathy asked for a divorce, she didn't have any leverage to make it happen. But the second time, she was armed with this incriminating information about her husband. There's no doubt that he gave in to all of her demands in lieu of her revealing his illegal operation. They were running a cheating ring, and they were charging a lot. I'm talking, this was like a whole career in and of itself on the side. When they asked Lisa if she thinks Bill killed Kathy, she says, "You know what? You better find Nicholas Richards." She tells them that he's involved in the cheating ring as well. Well, the cheating scandal is exposed. Nicholas is now facing a dishonorable discharge, and he's a mess. He doesn't waste any time confessing everything that he knows. The first thing he says is that he has nothing to do with her murder, but he knows who did, and he helped move the body. Oh my God, wait till you hear this. Wait till you hear what he tells these investigators. He tells them that he talked to Bill on the phone the weekend before June 9th, 1986. Nicholas says that Bill calls him and asks him to watch the kids so that he can meet with Kathy to discuss some things about the divorce. So Nick takes the kids to dinner on Sunday, and when this man brings the kids back, Bill's like, "Can you tuck them in? Can you put them to bed?" After that, this is just, I can't believe that people can just do this stuff. But he calls Nick into a room, pulls him aside, and stands in front of a small wooden cedar chest. He slowly opens it up and reveals Kathy's dead body. He just looks at him and goes, "You know what you need to do, because Kathy was going to expose their scheme. She had to go." Since Nicholas is Bill's partner in this scandal, he feels like it is his responsibility to dispose of her. So he waits until it's dark, drives out of the city, opens up the back of his vehicle, and dumps her on the side of the road, leaving those clothes folded beside her. However, he kept that wooden box and tells detectives that there are bloodstains in there. Now it makes sense. Remember Kathy's legs and arms? How they were twisted into this very unnatural position. It was because she was crammed into this small box, and once rigor mortis set in, she was already in this awkward position, and there was nothing they could do to unravel her. This poor woman, that's horrific. And if that's not bad enough, they call in Bill's daughter. Now she's 9 years old, and when she's being interviewed again, she tells them that she knows who killed her mom. It was her dad because he wasn't where he said he was on the night that Mommy died. She said that she woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone, and so was his car. This seems like it would be enough, but it's all circumstantial. They need a confession, and Nick agrees to wear a wire. He makes a deal with the Air Force. In exchange for getting information or a confession from Bill, he doesn't have to serve any time. Like he's basically going to get away with his part in all this. Well, they agree and he wears a wire. He calls Bill up and says, "You know what? We need to talk about this scandal because I'm being demoted." They meet in person, but no matter what Nick says to try to get Bill to crack, he just changes the conversation. Bill even tells Nicholas, "You know what? You're looking rough. I'll take care of everything." He hands him an envelope of cash and tells him to get out of the country for a little while. They've got nothing concrete until Nick admits he still has the wooden chest that he placed Kathy's body in, and that is when the conversation changes. Bill freaks out. He's like, "You need to get rid of it. You need to get rid of that now." So, this is the evidence that the authorities need. They've got their killer. All along, it was Kathy's estranged husband, Bill. He would do anything to keep his ego intact, anything not to be found out, anything to stay on top, even kill the mother of his children. But wait, you have to hear what happens next. On July 10th, 1989, 3 years after her death, investigators arrest Bill for the murder of his wife. The trial is set for June 20th, 1990. But before the trial starts, Bill pleads guilty because he wants to avoid the death penalty. He wrote out a stipulation of facts outlining this chilling chain of events that led to his wife's murder. And I'm going to tell them to you, and I want you to tell me what you think because I have my thoughts. But here's what he says happened. Bill said he asked Kathy to come over to his place to go through some family photos. He's insinuating that none of this was planned. When she got there, she was going through them. They got in an argument because she said she wanted to cut Bill out of the photos. Apparently, she took a pair of scissors and started to do so right in front of him. That's when he said he got enraged because of everything. Because of the cheating, because of the doctor. It was all going through his head. The divorce, the custody of the kids, the leverage that Kathy had, and she flaunted around about exposing everything. His cheating scheme, and he just snapped. He says, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just started to attack her." He knew that she was going to go to his superiors and he was going to be charged with battery. Everything was going to end anyway, and it was going to end badly. When this realization hit him, he just went all the way, and he ended up strangling her with a cord. He even had intercourse with her to make it look like it was a random attack. Bill was sentenced to life in prison, but in an unexpected turn of events, the military decided that they were going to take over the case, and they gave him 60 years instead at the disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Wow. He goes from the death penalty being on the table to life in prison to the military taking over and getting 60 years. He was eligible for parole since 1998. I hate to tell you this, I really do, but he was actually released just last year in May of 2021. So Bill walks free, only serving 32 years. Nicholas Richards didn't get charged with anything. The only thing that happened to him was that he was dishonorably discharged. I'm shocked. This beautiful young mother of two was taken away for reasons that should not warrant murder. It's true that she made mistakes, but that should never be the answer. She left behind her two precious little children, and they will forever live with the fact that they lost both of their parents when Bill made that fateful decision to take Kathy's life.